Hello there, it's ya boy off ED. I might sound a bit ill right now, and that's probably because I have Caesar 3 fever. Look at me there, putting a farm in such a location that the granary exit can't work. I am truly good at this game. Well, I'm just going to start off this video by saying it's a sequel to another video talking about the first half of Caesar 3 and talking about the game in general. This is my follow-up video. Because I refuse to stop playing it, I'm just going to keep talking about Caesar 3. So here is the commentary on the second half of Caesar 3's campaign. Dying or not, we've got to do it. So we're here in level 7, I think it is, the Tingis stage. And if you watch the old video, you'll note that the Carthage stage, the previous one, was quite difficult and I had to go to extreme lengths to get through it. Thus I come into this, the next stage, thinking, what new trouble are we going to face? Well, this stage is sort of a relief from the last stage, because last time we had to deal with Carthaginians, natives, and the fact it was a desert, which makes everything a bit harder, because stuff just sets on fire and fountains don't work so well, and I think the farms don't work very well either. Well, this time, things are a bit more normal. We've got some nice accessible farmland, albeit over a bridge, and perhaps the most important thing making this stage easier than the previous one is the financial situation. I say that while having almost no money, as you might note, but essentially, you could sell pottery and furniture right from the beginning, and those are two of the sort of easy to make finished goods. So I can just slap down furniture and pottery producing districts right in front of the entrance to the stage. This means people will constantly show up and buy them, real easy, and I also don't necessarily need to get food before I do that. As you can probably tell, we still haven't got any food infrastructure going, but I'm already making money, theoretically, off this setup. So I just rushed to get something stable going with a nice, beautiful tent city, and now we're going to have this second tent city on the other side of the river that might produce some food. Although the reason I want to produce food is not to feed the people actually, it's because in the Augustus mod, which we are playing with the game right here, you have to have food before you can build any military units, and I'm just paranoid. I want to get some units as quick as possible, because recall, I'm still under the impression that this stage is going to be even harder than the previous hard stage, but as I now know, it's actually simpler for the reasons stated above. And because the map is a bit kinder, it's sort of smaller, and there are some obvious choke points. We're not out in the desert now. So everything about this stage will be easier, and I'll just show you a few things that happened along the way. Here we are after having walled ourselves off. We've got this early game stable setup with a couple of housing districts, a bunch of food, and after inspecting the edges of the map, basically the enemy can only come from the south, and there's two really easy choke points to block the south off from our corner of the map. So we've towered up those choke points, put some palisade walls in front of those walls with gatehouses, so that I can in theory send troops out to defend the palisades in a battle. And that's kind of it. We can sort of sit here and just make cash off this arrangement, and now take our time. This was something I sort of started to appreciate in the second half of the campaign. Not rushing down the builds, I guess, and spending all of your money at once. Just sort of sitting back and letting a few in-game years pass without really doing anything, just to build up some cash and sort of get used to the stable situation of your town. And by that I mean, like, if you build something, as mentioned in the previous video, it changes the range of buildings and it changes the amount of resources you're using, the amount you're producing, and because the game doesn't really tell you those things, you have to kind of learn them through experience. And while I offer this as a criticism of the game, because it doesn't need to be like that and it does make it a lot harder for no particular good reason, I think there's a sort of zen, meditative quality to not really knowing how much food you need to produce, because it kind of incentivizes taking things really slow, as I was saying, and just slowly building houses bit by bit, waiting a year to see if your food reserves went down after you added 10% to your population or something, and then sort of based on that vibes-based assessment, you would then decide whether or not you need to build more food or delete some people or something like that. I think what I'm saying is that the answer to life, the universe, and everything appears to be to just sit back and play some Caesar 3. Time for me to make some more furniture production districts here in the corner. What we need that furniture for is not only to potentially upgrade the nearby houses, which will eventually want it, but perhaps more importantly, to give people something to do because unemployment is out of control. These housing districts, again, do give you a sort of punishment if you upgrade them really fast, as I've often been doing. That is to say, if you make a tent city, which I did in the beginning of this stage, and then you upgrade it, your population is going to increase like tenfold, but you don't have anything for them to do because you'd already based the employment situation around the smaller population. And it's hard to keep providing more services in such a way that there's enough employment to employ all the people showing up to use those services. So we've got some good old-fashioned economic management going on here. And essentially it will usually turn out that you'll have too many people, as we do right here, even with not that many houses and with overproducing everything to make sure the RNG distribution isn't too annoying, which I talked about a lot in the last video. We've still got too many people, although in this stage you might see I've actually got a suboptimal housing district down there in the middle, in between our two main housing districts. That's just because I wanted to have some employee access to the new pottery district I put down there. And you sort of have to have at least one house near stuff to make the employees go there. But then once you put one house down, as we also learned in the last video, if you don't provide that sub-district of houses with services, they'll get very rebellious. So you sort of have to put enough houses down to make it worth bothering to provide amenities to a district. So it's not really worth making like 2 houses somewhere, I think anyway, to provide employment to places. Although that might not be the case in vanilla, it's because the mod adds this system where if you have houses that are less or lesser in quality than other ones in your city, they will rebel. There's this serious income inequality penalty that is overwhelmingly difficult to deal with, basically. If you don't attend to it, it will just dominate the entire stage. So, what I'm saying is that this town is not quite optimal, it's got tons of unemployment, but I've been very nice to my people and we've got a sort of communist utopia going on where everyone quite literally has a roof over their head, they're all fed, and I don't know, you're probably not going to get killed by whoever it is we're supposed to be defending this province from, so it's all very nice. As we saw, the first attack didn't go so badly. They came at us with a bunch of those blue-trousered guys, just the natives, basically, whatever that means. A bit later, we've got some prosperity going across the river, where I'm permitting the people to use pottery and furniture, because the other side, they have to export it all, they don't get to use it very much. But that's okay, we've got some inequality, but I think I read in the manual for the mod, that is, rather than the game, that the inequality thing kind of stops happening once you get to a certain standard. So once you've got people actually in houses, they'll stop being so mad that other people have better houses, at least they've got something. Here's the first real attack by a foreign power. And the good news is it's much easier than fighting Carthage, fighting whoever this is supposed to be. We're supposed to be on the western coast of Africa somewhere, so I'm guessing this is some tribal kingdom that we're effectively taking over by building here. They're not happy about this, but they don't seem to have much equipment, so we can easily defeat them, and they also had fewer numbers than the Carthaginians, which helped out a lot as well. So seeing this, I started feeling pretty confident that this stage is indeed going to be easier than the last stage. Here I am poking around, wondering if we can make our people more prosperous. I don't usually go further than this, or I've never gone further than this in the prosperity chain so far. The reason is you need to have oil. We can actually get oil by buying it. But I didn't want to have to deal with that nonsense, so we're going to try and get to the requisite prosperity score without going any further than this tier of citizen. And this is one of the reasons why playing the military stages is easier, because you don't have to go so far in setting up your economy, which means things like managing the space and the road network is just less important. Here we are a bit later with another attack coming in, but there is a development. This time they have their own javelineers who can throw over the palisades at me, so my grand plan here isn't so good. But it turns out the legionaries are quite good at defending against this. They actually have a different animation where they change to being in a sort of testudo when under ranged attack, so I'm guessing that increases their defense and makes them great tanks for such things, and generally we defeat the enemy once again. It's now time to start expanding out of our safe position, because most of the farmland is here in the middle of the map. So I have to make another sub-city out in this more exposed location. The issue with this location is that we end up building pretty close to where the enemies spawn. I didn't have to build like this, I just didn't really know if they were going to spawn down here so much. Well, it turns out they do. I had of course put in lots of walls and towers, thinking something like this might happen. But it's not quite enough, or I guess it's not fast enough, because my military units are so far away from this front. It takes them forever to show up, and gives the natives here time to start breaking their way in. We managed to defeat them in this instance because even though they did break into the town, Our units showed up to sort of stop them right on the edge of where our stuff was, so maybe we won't lose any peace score for this breach of the defenses, and eventually they run off. These native attacks are always easier than the main military rival attacks. So we defeat them. I'm going to try and have more troops in this corner of the map, basically, presuming that more stuff was going to come. So a bit later, the enemy do indeed show up here, and we can react immediately this time. It's not going to go precisely to my plan here, because what I want is for these spawning enemies to go kind of towards where my gatehouse is, so that they waste time fighting the cheap-to-replace palisades. But what they can do is what they are doing. They can go to the right and fight the main wall, because there they only have to break through a small amount of distance to get into the town and cause chaos. So we have to sort of hope they don't do that too much. Some of them start getting aggroed over. I think the AI can be aggroed by your presence, so being near the enemy is often enough to distract them. And in this case, I can put the legionaries right behind the wall in case the enemy get through. The walls seem to last way longer against this tribal type of enemy than against the Carthaginians. So they seem to hold, and we also reinforced the area with more palisades and more towers, because I was close enough to houses to have even more towers here. Here comes another wave. You can see the enemy are mercilessly killing the local sheep who just wander around the map. The sheep aren't actually part of the game, which is a bit confusing at first, because you might think you can do some animal husbandry on them or generally pastoralize them. No, they're just sort of NPCs, but now they're dead, so we're going to have to take revenge for those sheep. This attack is a bit bigger than the previous ones, and it's actually making some headway. So now I need to try and predict where they're going to break through and have the legionaries be in the way to block them. I don't think I do this successfully, because they do immediately get through to start fighting the Javs in melee. Not what we need, but the other Javs from the other side of town now show up to join the melee effectively as well. But the guys at the back of the Jav formation can still throw. So we've got the situation vaguely contained. The plan works basically. Having enough palisades to delay the enemy makes life easy. So even though it kind of looks like something bad's happening in that loads of ruins are appearing when the palisades get destroyed, you don't lose any peace score, you generally don't lose many troops, and it all just works out fine. We end up having a ranged battle, which we can win again using our legionaries as tanks, and then I decided to stop messing around because it takes so long to fully deploy my army to this front. I thought I'm just going to completely wall off this front, like with overkill levels of wall. We have so much income from selling stuff that we don't really need money at this stage. It's fine to just spend money constantly building and replacing walls on the front line. You can see the rest of the town I've added in between all of these various shots. All I need to do is keep adding squares of houses, usually in places where there's water and trees nearby, so I can add pottery and furniture as well to those squares. And by just continually overproducing it, make sure our prosperity remains high. Here I'm having to do some antics with this roadblock to make sure the school children don't spawn on the wrong road behind a different roadblock. Very inconvenient, and the sort of thing that this game, really in its vanilla mode, needed to be there, because so much of the game's management is about not only what roads people will take, but about what direction out of a building they will go. That sort of fine detail actually matters. The mod here allows me to do something with this to make this whole setup viable. I do wonder what viable setups would have actually worked in the main game though. After building up a couple of new house squares, it actually completes the stage. But that's not what we want to see, because I did not come here to just leave once the town was set up. I want to milk this thing for cash. So I decided to choose the option to stay in the stage and keep playing, thinking I'll now increase my salary and grind for cash. But no, it actually says after you've completed the stage, you can't get any more money out of it. So that means we just have to not complete the stage. Luckily, I've got a save just before finishing the stage, so we go back in time and start ruining the town so that it doesn't meet the requirements. This will allow us to stay longer and keep making cash. I feel like, since you can effectively grind for cash, it shouldn't not let you grind for cash after the stage. I think it's just more satisfying to let you complete the stage and then sit here maybe for a certain amount of time or something. I don't know if the stages, by the way, have any time limit. It feels like maybe after 100 years you should be kicked out or something. It doesn't say there's a time limit, so I guess you can grind for infinite money if you really want. And I wanted to grind for a bit of money at least, just to have some contingency for the future, since this is a nice safe town we've got going here. Also, I thought anyway, we actually do face a risky invasion a bit later, because there's a weakness in my defensive lines. When the enemy attack from the east, there's actually only a couple of palisade tiles they have to get through to break through to a building, that reservoir right there. There is also an aqueduct which kind of works like a wall, in that they have to take a little bit of time to get through it, and your troops can attack through the aqueduct as well, so it's similar to a palisade in that regard. Perhaps that's the vanilla equivalent exploit, putting aqueducts everywhere. Well, in this case, we also have troops, so we defend Sparta style, and manage to defeat the enemy. You might also note, my water setup is such that I didn't even need that reservoir. I'd set it up so that we can be supplied from both water sources at the same time, so if one goes down, we are still good, and we get away with this, broadly speaking. The enemy run off, a few of them stick around to get absolutely annihilated with jabs, and that's that. The town is safe once again. We probably lost some peace score for losing the reservoir, but I think if you don't lose too much, you don't lose too much score, and we've got some peace to burn. I also thought, I don't want to risk that happening again, so I ended up spending a bunch of money making this massive wall setup where we're much more defended from that direction, essentially. And I've even left a gap in that northern wall because I'd rather the enemy attack up there, since I have towers and it's a bit easier for me to deploy my troops to that location. So that's that. Now here's a random thing that happened which led to a discovery. It looks like there wasn't enough food in this one corner of town, so I decided to punish the people for being hungry by also making them homeless. That's just the sort of governor I am. I'm very nice, and it also helps with my unemployment stats to kick people out of town. So it's all about the numbers, really. The people, well, they're an afterthought. Here's an interesting thing, though. It turns out that if you do what I'm doing here, replace all of the derelict houses with gardens to beautify the town, it's going to cause a problem. Because gardens sort of work like roads, and I feel like I'd vaguely noticed this before, in that sometimes if there's a garden by a road, your guys will go and stand on it briefly as if it was somewhere they could go and then just walk back. Now that's all very nice. It seems like a good idea to let people go into the gardens. But of course, this is a game where the places people walk, well, they matter immensely, so we can't just have them walking anywhere they like. So having this pleasant garden for people to walk through is actually going to cause problems because it reduces their range. It's going to just devolve houses, I expect, because they'll forget to go to school because the gardens were so nice. What we need to do is make the gardens less passable. And the mod actually adds a few things you can build that act like gardens but are impassable. So we can effectively put in a garden-style wall. The Emperor wants some pots again, but we're overflowing with pots, so that's no trouble. We put in the colonnade. Now the place still looks pretty nice, but the prefects won't accidentally go and spend the day in the park rather than not making the town be on fire. Anything like that. The most important part of a park is the keep off the grass signs, basically, so we've got all that set up. That was an interesting discovery, basically. So gardens are also sort of roads. Potentially you could use them as roads or something, I don't know, maybe make your town look a bit better. Well, eventually, I accidentally completed the stage again. It was because when I was deleting people, it reduces the amount of cultural buildings you need to pass the stage, and the way I was staying in the stage was by having fewer cultural buildings that I thought I needed. So I accidentally ended up with the right amount after a while. I decided to just leave, thinking that's probably enough cash for now. And we head into the next stage. In this stage, all of the farmland is in a big blob in the middle, but you can see they've set up this trap. To get to the farmland, or all of it, you'll have to destroy this forest area, but this will unleash a pack of wolves, so there's a little bit of a trap going on here, pretty nice. And they're actually not the only ones, as I soon discovered. I was looking around, looking at the edges of the map basically, thinking where are the places where we might be attacked from, and thus where should we not build. And while looking around, we can see other packs of wolves frozen in time, and we can use our time-freezing powers to actually just wall off the wolves right at the start of the stage. We learned about this the hard way in the previous video, where if you don't do this, you will just be completely screwed because all of your people coming in, the immigrants, will just be annihilated by packs of wolves, and you actually can't play the game with the wolves on the loose. So I guess you just have to do this. A very weird setup in the game design meta. It feels like the wolves should show up later or something, and at least not be present at the start, because as I said, they are a serious problem, and being attacked by wolves can stop you from building the things that kill wolves, so you can get stuck like this. Well, it's an old game, being stuck is perhaps not entirely undesirable. Anyway, so we wall off all the wolves, and then I start building this tent city in the corner. I made my judgments about where the enemy might be, and I decided that this one corner in particular is probably very safe. It can probably only be attacked from vaguely the top of the screen, so if needed we can wall off this whole corner and just sit here. The goal is to make iron and weapons, because both iron weapons, furniture and pottery can all be sold on this stage, and those are all things that are really easy to make. So in terms of money, this stage is going to be easy. We are suffering from spontaneous combustion, but that just seems to happen a lot at the start of these stages. Maybe living in tents is just bad for your health. But anyway, all we need to do is get enough employees to make the iron mines work, get weapon production going, and then we'll just sell everything we can. I built this third square to start making the pottery as well, and that will basically be that. I'm even going to do some city planning. Looks like I was thinking of building a housing district over there to the north somewhere, but we'll need to get a water supply there, so let's put an aqueduct in before we build up this third square, so that we know where we can build, basically. And we're even going to make a special consideration here, because as I'm building this aqueduct, you'll see I sort of pull back a bit and then put this little kink in it. That's so that there are two spaces between the aqueduct and the road to its north, so there's more space for building important things around the square. There we go, a tiny tidbit of actual Caesar 3 gameplay strategy. We finally commentated on something. Well, aside from this, we've now got no cash, so we can just sit back and sell all of this stuff, making our tent people work for us. A pretty nice labor camp we've set up. Can we turn it into something resembling a city? I was actually lying just now about being able to sit back. Because of the mod, we need to have a food supply before we can make any military units, and we probably want to get those going as soon as possible, because who knows who's going to show up and when. So because of that, I do have to go out and also build in the exposed position in the middle of the map. Well, at least we've got most of our stuff more in the corner, but that said, it doesn't really matter if you're in the corner if you have no military units, because all walls and choke points can be broken through. And on that topic, I started building these walls, but I do think this is kind of pointless. I was walling off the places where I thought the enemy might come from. But again, without military units, this really makes almost no difference. You might feel safer for being walled off, but realistically, this buys you 5 seconds of additional time in the event of an invasion, and you are not going to be able to make a military in those 5 seconds. So I'm probably wasting money, and it would be better to just wait for later, basically. Build a wall in front of the enemy as they show up, that sort of thing. Here's a neat move. I need to get some food to my town on the edge of the map. This can theoretically be done, but right now the road is quite long to get there. So we can make a shorter road with some funky bridges. That's always nice, isn't it? The idea is that the granaries will go to the granaries by the farms and get some of the food. Since we have no numbers available on the rate of food flow to a certain granary, basically, we have no way of telling whether or not what we've got is enough to support that town without just waiting to find out. As you can see, I was ready for more invasions. I've decided to plop down a bunch of wall up at the top there. I had determined 3 places on the edge of the map where I thought the enemy would come from, and I think only 2 of them were actually used, so I was overcautious in my build here. Now, what am I doing in this clip? Well, I'm going around telling my granaries not to accept vegetables. This is because of my paranoia that I talked about in the last video. When you have more than one food type being grown, it destroys the food distribution system to some extent, basically. And we do have to grow more than one food type because the Emperor wants some vegetables today, and he wants them from me for some reason. So I have to make this half town over here ready to support some vegetable farms. We'll keep the vegetables in a warehouse and try to keep them out of the food supply so that people don't accidentally get only addicted to vegetables or something. I think it actually works the other way around. Because we have a wheat supply, that wheat supply will be given first priority for everything. So I'm probably fine to actually have vegetables in this setup, although wheat just seems better because it grows faster, I seem to remember reading in the manual. Now it's battle time. We did get some troops together before the first invasion happened, and I've put an even bigger wall. Basically, I should have just done that right now, only put the walls in when the invasion came in. Although there are restrictions on building when the enemy is close, so I guess it's nice to have it there in advance. Well, you can see it doesn't last very long, so that's how good a wall is. It buys you a few seconds, and then we keep fighting. The real advantage of a wall is the way it plays with the AI sometimes. In this case, it didn't play with the AI very much. Virtually all of them just took the shortest path through the wall and started fighting my troops. We have a few legionaries, not a full legion's worth, but they can stand out in front and try to tank the enemy. I think virtually all of them, all but one, get killed in this fight, so it's pretty nasty, and some of the javelineers have to fight in melee. But it proves to be just about enough. A couple of the enemies are still having a fun time fighting against the wall, which helps us out, and the rest do get killed. So there we go, we've held on just about, and we know at least that we need more than this, realistically, to defend this province. Another military matter comes up here. I noticed that the sentries who are deployed from watchtowers, they can throw jabs at the wolves and kill them in the wolf pen there, which is nice, I guess. Doesn't really help me here because they're not doing anything. And the wolves actually respawn infinitely as far as I can tell, so you can kill them in the little pens. They'll just reappear in the pens later. So I don't know how you're supposed to get rid of them, really. Maybe just building on top of where they spawn is the ultimate way to kill the wolves. I should just put a building there instead. Well, for now, an endless battle against the wolves takes place. We need more walls and more towers to defend this province. I also had this sort of theory that if I had walls like this, basically, creating channels towards the main wall, that the enemy, as they come down these channels, would sometimes stop and fight the walls, and this would split their force up, basically. That's the idea behind this weird and expensive palisade setup I'm going for. I'm pretty sure, in retrospect, it doesn't really help at all. Well, obviously, we'll see shortly, but something crazy is going on in the world of siege works outside. I'm also, though, finally going to actually put down some rock wall, some stone wall, and put towers on them. For this, I'm actually not building the full house square, as you can see here. I think the final evolution of building your houses in squares and overproducing everything is to realize you don't have to fill out the square at all, because I was having all these problems with unemployment, but it was only because I was filling out the squares with houses to be neat. You could just have a partial square. All you actually need is for there to be houses at the junctions. The parts in between don't matter so much, because it's the junctions where your employment is going to radiate out from towards the other buildings. So basically, we don't have to build that many houses, and it was in this stage that I finally realized that. And indeed, we don't have enough food to feed the whole town as it stands. So we both need to grow some more wheat instead of vegetables, because wheat grows faster, and take over more of the farmland. We're going to want to build the town around the farmland in the middle, essentially. But first, let's take a look at this next invasion, which goes rather different to the previous one. We actually don't really have much more in the way of troops right here, but my goal was to draw the enemy towards that line of towers and watchtowers I've built near the farms. However, the AI just behaves differently during this invasion and doesn't attack very efficiently. You can see many of their troops are, well, either doing nothing, or sometimes they walk away from us for a second then start walking back. So with only a few troops attacking the walls, they're holding for way longer than they should be holding in this situation. And we are bombarding the jabs in, of course. Every second they hold is allowing us to do damage. And in the end, they don't even get through the walls. They lose almost all their troops fighting along the wall instead. A couple of guys come in and then they just die instantly. So essentially, the majority of their force never reached us. We did the business there, and how this wall setup was different in the AI's mind to the one it just went through in seconds earlier, I don't know. It might be something to do with the angles. Maybe I am onto something by having walls at different angles here and there. Well, for whatever reason, we're fine this time. Perhaps this will add to the difficulty though. Looks like the Emperor wants to take my troops. This is a case where, while it says I have 4 legions, one of the legions has no one in it, the other one only has 6 there. So I'm going to send basically all of my troops to go and do whatever the Emperor wants. This seems like a great time to put in some proper defenses. So I'm going to build a new housing district in the choke point so you can wall it off and put towers in. Being very economical, not putting many houses in this housing district because we have too many people already. Going to play things safe. I think this is the better way to do things, really. I was over spamming before. So we'll get something going there. But it's not an invasion from the outside that causes the real issue. There is this Gladiator revolt. I don't really know why this happened, but we have gladiator schools providing gladiators for entertainment purposes. It seems there's some chance that they're not getting paid enough or something? I don't know. I probably did not even read the message that might have explained why this was happening. Suddenly, we're fighting the gladiators on the street, and the gladiators start destroying things and killing the random NPCs. Not very useful. So what can we do about this? I could deploy what troops I have to try and stop them, but I kind of thought maybe the cops would deal with it. I thought maybe the prefects would win against the gladiators, but maybe the gladiators can easily kill the cops or something. I guess they have more combat training, as it were. And it got to the point when I thought maybe I should try to increase my internal defenses, because these guys probably could destroy the entire town. However, the revolt just goes away after only destroying a few buildings and only causing one major issue, which is that they cut the water supply to the middle, and we lost a whole bunch of people who just walk off once the water supply is gone. We can quickly put it back, and some of those homeless people swarming towards the edge of the map will go back now that the housing space is back. They sort of smell that their houses have been rebuilt by somebody and will try to go back to them, but not all of them. So we actually now have a labour shortage all of a sudden. That dealt with unemployment, didn't it? Just cut the water supply and your stats will look much better. And indeed, now that we've dealt with the gladiator problem, I'm going to slap down loads of cops near the gladiator schools. This is a very realistic policing strategy. We don't really know what causes the problems. We don't even know how to find out what causes the problems. But if we just throw tons of cops all over the place, maybe the problem won't cause too much damage when it inevitably comes back. And thus, the province is secured from within and without. And our troops who went off somewhere apparently won their battle because we're allowed to now build a triumphal arch. There's nowhere good to put it really, so I slap it by these farms. I think it gives you a massive desirability bonus, similar to gardens, if you put it in the housing districts. But the way we're setting up our town makes it really hard for me to do that, so it's just somewhere random. Maybe there's some sort of city-wide bonus for living in a town that has the arch as well. What I basically need to do now is up the prosperity of my people. We need loads of pottery and furniture because that will allow our houses to upgrade beyond the initial tier of house. So we're going to squeeze in districts here and there that will generate those things, which also provides a bunch of employment, so it's always handy. Although of course upgrading your houses produces unemployment in the form of greater population, so I don't know if this is a good idea for our unemployment stats, but we need the people anyway. The numbers continue to go up, even the bad numbers. Now here come the enemy. And earlier I was implying that my weird strategy of putting walls all over the place wasn't really that effective. But looking back at the footage here, it seems that it is, because you can see this invasion force is massively split up and distracted, fighting the walls that even technically aren't stopping their progress. They can just walk through all of this, but they don't want to. And it sort of tempts them to split up sideways as well. Instead of coming in a column, they go sideways to fight more walls. And that means even more walls end up sort of being in front of them as they then turn to progress towards us again. And even more walls get fought, and basically, we're fighting a tiny portion of the invasion force at a time. Almost all of their troops are doing relatively nothing. They're costing me 6 denarii each time they destroy a wall, since I'll have to put it back. But that's fine, we've got 6,000 of those, we can have 1,000 sacrificial walls. And it does cost money to recruit troops, so not losing troops can theoretically save money. We don't know how much, of course, because it's just not that sort of game, but maybe sacrificing a load of wood is better than sacrificing a load of people. Well, we'll check the money on that. Now, the Emperor wants more vegetables because only Gaulish carrots taste real good. The problem I had is that I thought I had a warehouse full of vegetables just in case he asks for them again, and I've since deleted my vegetable farms. It turns out that one of my granaries somewhere was accepting vegetables. That means the warehouse will have gradually exported all of its vegetable stock to put it in the granary instead, and then somebody ate them. So, the Emperor's carrots have already been consumed. We're going to have to quickly reinforce the laws to make sure nobody eats vegetables, and then put the vegetable farms back. So soon the carrot crisis will be over, and we can resume time and go back to the battle, where things are basically going to be fine, even with only a few of our troops, since so many are off somewhere doing something else for the Emperor. We're easily able to repulse this attack, mainly because most of the attack defeated the secondary wall and then got bored. We essentially rout the enemy here, because once you kill enough of the invasion force, they just start trying to leave. So none of them got through. A very successful defense. But for whatever reason, my takeaway from this was that the wall strategy didn't work. I don't know why I thought that. It looks like it worked really well, but we'll see that actually informs my decisions in a second. Here come the troops we sent to the Emperor. Well, some of them come back anyway. Looks like he got about half of them killed, doing whatever they were doing. Well, they're back now and we can re-recruit the rest, so we're now going to be up to full strength. What I didn't do though was rebuild that wall system because, as mentioned, for whatever reason, I deemed that project a failure. So by the time the next invasion comes in, it's not there, and you can see the massive difference it makes, because when there's nothing in the way of the enemy, they just walk towards you all at once in a block, and then they're all going to fight through this wall section at the end at the same time. So this really is much worse for us than the earlier setup. I don't know why I considered that weird, lengthy wall system to be bad. It's way better than this system. So we're going to have to fight a little bit more earnestly here. They easily break through the walls because when they're just coming through in a block, they break through instantly. And we'll have to try and get the legionaries to hold them at the breach while we bombard them with everything. The watchtowers behind my walls, on the left by the way, can shoot through the walls, I noticed on this map. So that's another potential exploit. You can wall off watchtowers and they'll still shoot, but we learned previously that's not always the case for ballista towers. Even though ballista towers are taller looking, they can't always shoot over walls. For some reason. Well, basically, the province is fine, even if I'm not defending very well. We've got enough palisade walls all over the place to probably stop the enemy, and enough troops to stop them if they get through, so our peace score is going to be creeping up and up. Eventually, we're pretty much there with the prosperity, just need some more distribution to go on. We've got everything we need to upgrade the houses, but they don't always have the stuff they need because the markets need to go out and make a dedicated furniture sales run, I think, to sell furniture, for example, and it does that separate to selling food. So it doesn't always happen, basically, but eventually our people will get some furniture. The Emperor's getting his vegetables. This time we've got them all stored up, and we're being invaded, but most of my guys are actually off fighting for the Emperor somewhere else right now, and we're being attacked in the other place. I've also prepared various defenses because I thought this place might be attacked, and that means we're going to benefit from the fact I still have those weird parallel walls going out there, which distracts many of the enemies. You can see loads at the top there just doing nothing. Some nice news that our other army has won a battle somewhere, so they're on the way back. Too late, but it's nice to know they beat something else. And now we just rely on the fact that the enemy are too janked out by our wall system to really get through. We've only got a few troops, but we also have the ballistas ready, and we only have to fight like 4 guys at a time. They also seem to rout or get distracted by going backwards to fight the walls behind where they already were. Truly, the marvel of walls cannot be overstated. We get another triumphal arc thanks to our victory elsewhere. Still nowhere good to put it, but at least it's near some houses here, so they might feel honoured to be near that. What we really need, though, is some culture score now. We've almost won, but we're still quite far off with culture. To get culture, you basically mouse over the culture thing, and it tells you what you're lacking, what's causing you to be considered uncultured. So it will say build more theatres, schools, libraries and academies, and I just have to find spaces for them. I didn't put back the parallel wall system, so I clearly still don't think it's a good idea. Here's the infinite battle with the Pit of Wolves. As mentioned, they do just respawn in there, and now and again our Jav sentries will kill them again, so that's all going fine, I think, anyway. Now, with this culture thing, I eventually just got mad and thought, you know what, I'm going to build this big road in this space and just put down all of the culture buildings together, because you get the culture score from a building, even if it doesn't really do anything, so it doesn't have to serve a lot of the population. It's not like you need a certain percentage of the population to have access to theatres to be considered cultured. If there are just tons of theatres somewhere on the map, that's good enough. So I slapped down a bunch of schools, academies, libraries, theatres, and an acting school, and with that, we are now a sufficiently cultured province. We just need a few hundred more people. They might have showed up if I just waited for a while, because it takes a long time for the upgraded extra space you get at the higher tiers of houses to be filled out, because people come and take those places very slowly. But there is reason right now to actually add more housing to this town, because I've managed to get tons of unemployment. I don't know how I achieved this. I guess spamming all of the culture buildings where I don't need them has actually created enough employment that there's stuff for people to do. Everybody works at those theatres that nobody can go to, and they're having a great time. So I had to add these extra houses here to get the population score and try to produce some employees. But then that made my prosperity score go down, so I have to upgrade these houses back up to roughly where everybody else is to get the prosperity score back. That means I need to provide them with a whole bunch of services, and that means I'm not going to get any more employees basically out of this, because any I do get will be used as providing services to themselves. I end up deleting some of my internal defenses to get some more employees, especially since I don't need them whatsoever. They're just sort of there as emergency fallbacks at this stage, and as places for people to work even if I don't need them. Later on, we're basically there. We've got all of the stuff we need. We just need the prosperity score to go slightly up, so we need a couple of those small casas on the left of the screen to upgrade into medium casas or something, and that will do it. I eventually just speed up time and wait for it to happen, because we had all of the stuff in place for it to happen, but you have to wait for the RNG to settle into place and for somebody to remember how to buy pottery, that sort of thing. And boom, suddenly the stage is complete. We have done another one. Another relatively easy stage, I thought. It was harder than the last stage, but it wasn't too bad. No major disasters, anything like that. But now we move on to a harder stage, and we know it's going to be harder right off the bat, just because it's a desert stage, where there's less food, less water, and there's various random issues like fire and disease that seem to come up more. This map has 3 areas where you can build, basically, where there's some fertile land and some water. One of them has a native tribe around it, so I didn't really want to build there. I was liking the look of this one at the top, but we're not actually going to build there, as we'll discuss in a second. I notice we can't build clay pits. That's going to be an issue, because you need clay pits to get pottery, and everything above the lowest tier of house, the small casa I was just mentioning, requires you to have pottery, so we can get the clay from somewhere else, basically, and then produce it, but that's going to mean it's expensive to go above that tier of house. Well, on the topic of money, the first thing we need to worry about is what can we produce and sell. And I noticed that we can sell olives and olive oil, so there's an easy production chain to go down, and furniture too is easy to make and sell. So we just need to start off by making a labor camp that will sell those things, and then we'll work out everything else from there. What I need to work out also is where are the enemy going to come from. I'm looking around the edges of the map, and you have to look for areas where there's a relatively wide empty space. This is what the previous experiences have taught me. But one thing I didn't learn from previous experience is that, well, I thought the enemy can't really attack you from directions close to the exit and entrance to the stage, the red and blue arrows towards the bottom that you can barely see. This is not true, and I actually have been attacked from such directions before, but for whatever reason, I presumed it couldn't happen, and that is going to inform my strategy, and I am saying this to foreshadow that of course it can happen. Anyway, for now, I ended up deciding to build over here on the left, where we can build in this sort of pocket area around the oasis, with mountains, meaning this area is pretty protected, if we gamble that the enemy can't come from the top left of the screen, which I did just because that gap seems sort of small. Again, I don't think that was a wise decision. However, it does pay off because it seems they just happen to not come from that direction, so we're going to get away with that at least. Here's our initial town, a couple of housing squares, but of course the squares are worse on desert maps. You get fewer people and it's harder to provide services to them, but we're still going to do this strategy anyway just because it looks neat. I'm even adding in this planning factor, putting in aqueducts in advance, thinking that in previous stages I'd wished I'd had more aqueducts basically and more ability to expand out with the water supply. Here that's really not a very useful move, because the place I was taking the water, I could easily just get from the water to the left there without having this big thing running through the town blocking construction space. And indeed, we'll see in a second, I actually did do that, which also does have an advantage in that having 2 aqueducts supplying the same reservoir means if one gets taken down, it's less of an issue. A bit later, we've got issues with spontaneous combustion once again. I had provided doctors and barbers thinking that combination might protect us from health issues, but that was clearly not enough, and as mentioned, I think being on a desert map makes everything worse in that regard a little bit. We actually have no money, so I can't do anything about this for now. Luckily, I've got like 25 grand in my personal bank account, so I send 5 grand to the town, and with that we can have some healthcare reform. Very nice of me, I think. A lot of people these days want the government to improve healthcare through spending. Well, what if a person within the government just went and took their actual own money and built all of the healthcare infrastructure themselves? albeit kind of for private profit because I also own everything this town produces. Once again, the economic situation is a bit confusing. I don't think there's anything that's ever happened like this in real life, so it's hard to make an analogy. But basically, I'm willing to let the people bathe as long as they stop setting themselves on fire. I think that's a fair policy. So we've nestled ourselves amongst the oasis and amongst the mountains in this nice little spot with plenty of work camps to generate me some money now, and I've got a couple of farms making vegetables so we can start putting a military together before somebody shows up to destroy all of this. I originally wanted to go Javs only because I thought I don't really need legionaries based on previous experience. Generally, palisades make for good enough legionaries, but the Emperor asked for weapons, so that's why I built that weapons factory in the corner. So you can see my plan. I've got some Javs down there, and I've walled off essentially the other side of the map. My thought was that the enemy will always come from over there, so we'll end up putting defenses in this pass in the middle. Well, that's not what's actually going to happen, as foreshadowed earlier. Now we need to do some adjustment to the water system, some exciting civil engineering action here in Caesar 3. We can adjust the aqueduct layout by handily stopping time so that water doesn't flow. Then we can destroy things and put them back in different places, and the water supply is never cut off. A very handy technique. I was doing that just to add this extra farm in the space next to the granary there. We could also have moved the granary, but that's too much effort, I suppose. We need loads more farms because, of course, we don't know how much food we're making, we don't know how much food we need, and we must simply embrace the zen of not knowing by overproducing. And I think in the desert maps, all farms are worse, plus vegetable farms are worse than wheat farms already. So who even knows how many we need? Loads, probably. Now the first invasion comes in, and it looks like I'm right for now. It is on the other side of the map. I started walling off the middle more, then immediately realized I'm actually walling over part of the native territory, which is slightly in the choke point. I decided to delete the walls before any trouble came from this, but it was too late. Just building a bit of wall on their territory means they're already sending guys to attack us. Handily, because there's an invasion happening right now, we have our own guys in position to fight the natives, so we defeat them easily. Here come the actual enemy. It's the Egyptians. This map, by the way, is Damascus, and we're fighting Egyptian rebels who are mad about Rome recently annexing Egypt, I think. So here they come. They've got some camels and some guys, but only a few. This seems to be one of the smallest initial invasions we've faced recently. They're being very generous, which is good because I actually only had one unit available to fight them with. But of course we have the palisade, and that's doing the business. I seem to be worried enough that I'm trying to set up a second line to fall back to if the enemy break through. It's sort of confusing because all of the different enemy unit types do have stats, I think, and they're all varyingly able to break through walls. These guys seem to take a long time to break through walls. They did much worse than the Celts did in the previous map. So basically, we're pretty much fine, or at least we're fine in that encounter, no danger whatsoever. Now my next experiment was to try and capitalize on what I learned on the Carthage map, the infamous Carthage map back in the previous video, which was something to the effect that missionary posts are lying to you about their requirements. And indeed, you can just put them in completely disconnected areas of the map with no employees, and they still work just fine. The reason I wanted to do this was not actually to build over here, but because if you have a missionary convert the main hut in the native area, you're then allowed to trade with the natives. So I was doing this to make money basically, and while I'm there, I'm going to change their road system. The reason for that is to make the missionary go to more useful places, and once you've missionized them a little bit, they don't mind if you adjust their road layout so that more of their houses are in range of the missionary post. The other thing we need to do, of course, is make there be a route between our town and theirs so that we can trade. So I start setting up this breach in the wall and putting in billions of gates to defend it. And a little bit later, we do see a guy coming through with a cart. What I don't really know, though, is how to trade with the natives. It just sort of happens in the background. When you trade with other towns, you have this menu where you're going through and deciding how many of each good to trade and what to trade and such. But with the natives, it just seems to go on in the background. I guess maybe they buy things that are already for sale to somebody else, or something like that, something nice and simple. Well anyway, we're going to make some money off the guys on the other side of the map, and we're actually not going to bother them aside from that. We're going to be nice to the natives in this area. What I am going to do though is start a new housing district behind the oasis here, so we can get some labour near the other side of this farming area. But because we already have too many people, we're going to do what I was talking about on the previous map, and that is to not make a full housing district. We're sort of going to make a little L shape. We're not doing the thing that I mentioned before where you only put houses on junctions on this map. Because on desert maps the housing square areas are smaller, it's kind of more important to actually fill out the areas and get more use out of the nearby service buildings. Well, in this case, we're going to do a roughly half housing square here. That will give us enough employees to operate the farms, and also gives us enough of an excuse to make a bunch more service buildings over here, which will be something for other people to do, and then give us the leeway to upgrade houses across the town and get more people. Now here's the thing I kept alluding to. It turns out the enemy can attack not only from our side of the map, but from right next to where I put all of my forts, which is a bit inconvenient, because your guys can get stuck in melee if the enemy make contact with them. So we stop time once again and very quickly put up a massive wall system between our town and the enemy. They actually can go around this to the left in that gap you might notice, but luckily they didn't notice that. And in fact they don't even go for the new wall. For whatever reason, this attack decides to head north, fighting through part of the old wall, where if they broke through that, they'd still be outside of the main wall system. So that's all fine. Something was catching fire, as you might have noted there, and also one of our iron mines caved in. That hasn't happened before, and it happened several times on this map. I wonder if it's a quality of the map. There's some sort of rock strength that determines how safe it is to mine or something. I have no idea, but we kept losing iron mines. You can just buy them again and put it back, so basically you just lose a bit of money in the long run. Anyway, back to the battle. You can see the enemy are having fun, achieving absolutely nothing fighting the other wall. They do start vaguely coming towards where we are, but we've got all of our jabs here now, so that's going to be easily enough to stop this relatively small enemy force. And we see something similar to what we saw with elephants back in Carthage. These camels kind of get stuck on the walls, and while they don't die there from being attacked, they eventually seem to despawn. I wonder if that's a fail-safe for when they can't pathfind somewhere, the game just deletes the unit eventually. Well, whatever happened, we won the battle and we've learned some important information. Our forts are in a bad place, but it's really annoying to move forts because you have to re-recruit the units, so I'm just going to leave them there and see what happens. Here's the new housing district, up and running, everything's going well, nothing's on fire, nothing to see here. And we now have some unemployment, which is good because I think having unemployment makes more people move to your city because there is something for them to do. You need to have a food surplus and some free jobs for people to really want to show up. So it's all going well. Here we are later on then. Things are looking pretty good, but we need to break through the clay ceiling. It's time to finally bite the bullet and try to just not lose all of our money making pottery. We don't know how much this is going to cost, we don't know how much pottery we need to get, we don't know how much we're going to get by just ordering it off the market. All of the numbers are completely gone. Again, we're in Zen, no numbers mode. We just go in here and say, well, give me the maximum amount of clay. We can slightly control the influx of clay by controlling how much clay space is allowed for in warehouses, so at least they can't give us more than that. Once we get that clay, we'll have pottery workshops around the place to make the pottery. On this map, you can actually just buy the pottery straight away, but I'm guessing this saves money. It's probably cheaper to make it yourself than to just buy it. But of course, we don't actually know that, although I think the numbers are provided by the mod to let you vaguely work out how much it costs to make goods. So maybe you could work that out. Well, here comes a native attack. The natives are fast and furious. They cut through your walls real fast. However, as you can see, they also don't know what direction to attack. They're cutting along the wall, achieving very little, and getting hit by a load of javelins along the way. So while that attack could have cut through immediately and got my jabs into melee before my legionaries arrived, they didn't. So thanks to them, they just really don't like the palisades. It makes me think that this is too much of an exploit really, and that maybe I can only do this because of the mod. But I also think you could do the same thing with aqueducts in vanilla because they have the same properties as palisades. Well anyway, enough of that. It was a random moment where I decided to downsize weapons production, and as I deleted a mine, the other mine just deleted itself, so that was random. We're getting rid of some weapons production here to make space for more pottery production in this little back corner, because we kind of need the pottery to be produced in various places so that the different markets have access to it. So we have to have different warehouses all trying to import the clay. I don't know if there's any way to control which ones get it and how much they get. There probably isn't. So we're just going to see what happens, remaining zen. Now I was planning to do something on the outside portion of the map, because as we upgrade our houses, we're going to need more food, so I'm going to need to actually use more of the farmland on the map. But it's all in bad locations, so now we have to build more dodgily. I start this new housing district in the safest position I could think of over here behind this oasis. We can sort of wall this area off. We're doing not the standard house square here, because I had this plan in mind to make a house rectangle, which I also sort of have to do because of there being a couple of rocks in the way that prevented me from doing a full house square. We'll see it in action in a second. The thing I was worried about with that new build was just that it would be attacked and the enemy would easily break in and destroy it. But the next wave comes, well, down at the other side of the map, so that's fine. And they are doing that thing again, where they try to fight their way through the wrong portion of the wall. If they went to the left, they could quite easily break into the main town, where I've got barely any defenses. But they're going to the right, where I've got loads of defenses, and they're not defending anything, so it wouldn't matter if they did break through. Although I suppose now they can run all the way up to the top of the map from here and attack the other portion of the town. Well, that's all a moot point, because they're just getting killed. They're not very good at breaking through the walls, it seems, compared to the natives. What they do have going for them, though, are these camel archers. They can shoot across the wall, and they actually take out a few of my jabs. Seeing this, I'm going to sally out against the camels, and the AI then makes a very good decision. They withdraw from that engagement. So a mix of terrible and great decision-making going on there. Off they go. With that, we can go back to making my new town. You can see how the housing rectangle is going to work here. We're going to have the same amount of service buildings as a house square would normally get, but there's essentially like 2 blocks of 2/3 the size, so there are more houses being served by the service buildings. The only reason I hadn't done something like this before is you don't know the range on service buildings, so the square was just a way to guarantee that everything would be in range. Using that rectangular shape doesn't guarantee that, and I was just finding out if it worked, and I'm pretty sure it did, so going for a rectangle is probably more optimal than going for a square. We'll have to look into that more. As you can see, there was another native attack. This was one where I was really worried they could break into the new town, so I'm out here fighting them in a field battle as soon as possible, and it's going really messily. One of the reasons it's going poorly is that one of the Jav units I needed to withdraw early on was stuck on my own secondary walls, so they couldn't withdraw and got stuck in melee, and they all died, as I recall, so that went badly. But the other Jav units managed to hide behind legionaries and do their thing, and we do drive the natives off. So that worked out in the end, but it was a bit scrappy, as I said. So here we are later, the new town is finished and they're starting to get upgraded. It's looking good. We are now nearing the population goal and the prosperity goal. We need the houses to be big enough to give us prosperity and big enough to give us pop space. We're probably getting there. So the whole pottery plan is working. We've got past the first tier of house. We've got some big houses in town now, because the next things you needed to provide were like furniture and oil, which I was already producing to sell. So we had those things ready and we could rocket up to a relatively big house section where you have these sort of apartment blocks. Although there is a limitation going on here that's hard to tell. The apartment blocks can only be upgraded into if a house is in its 4 square format. Sometimes, if you make 4 houses next to each other, they'll join up and there'll be one house that is 4 squares big. I just thought that was for visual purposes, but it actually does make a gameplay difference at this stage in the upgrade tree, because only the 4 square sized houses can be upgraded into the large insulae, these apartment block-like things. That's why you see some blocks but with smaller houses next to them. Those smaller houses probably have all of the stuff to upgrade to the next tier, but it's just that the small buildings can't be upgraded to the larger ones. So we're being held back by the sort of arbitrariness of whether the game decides to combine combine houses into groups of 4 or not. I think being more careful with how you build houses, or building them in groups of 4 and then letting people move in to guarantee they all group together, could be a way to make sure you get more of the better buildings here at the late stage in the game. Something to think about. Well, things are vaguely working out here. We just have to hope that something upgrades somewhere to get us to the prosperity score. I actually am going to have to build another housing district though to get enough population score, because we don't quite have enough space in the setup we have here. And I was thinking of doing it over there in the native territory, because I've now pacified the native territory, and because the only other place to build is basically right where the enemies spawn at the very top of the screen there on that remaining bit of farmland, and that's probably a bad idea. It got to the point when we're basically ready to finish this stage. You can see on the right, we almost have the numbers. I just need some people to show up, and I felt like I had the housing space for it already as well. So I was just going to build walls all over the damn place, as you can see, and wait for us to win. The issue is, we can't sustain the pottery supply. The imports of clay aren't enough, / aren't going to the right places, and various housing districts lose their pottery tier of houses and all the stuff above that. And then we lose all of our population space, and we'll lose prosperity over time as well for having lesser houses in the town. And because of this, we just entered this cycle where this happened a few times, and I kept thinking maybe somehow at some point it will resolve itself. We already import the maximum amount of clay, but I could also import pottery, so we're going to bite the bullet here, because I knew this was going to be quite expensive, but of course I didn't know how expensive. I also don't really know what I'm doing, so I say importing 10. What could that mean? This is some very bad user interface / user experience right here, but then again it was 1999. I think it's either one of two things. You either import pottery until you have 10 in the town, maybe that's what it means, or it means you import 10 a year. I've been investigating both theories, and it seems like it's neither of them, but I don't have another idea for how it works, so who knows. Well, a bit later we're attacked again. Luckily we're attacked in the favourable sort of way. They're distant from the harder to defend town, and they're in the spot where many of their troops will be obsessed with trying to get through that wall. The downside to this invasion, well, not really a downside, is that it came during one of the pottery famine waves that causes everybody to become homeless, because they literally refuse to live in a house that doesn't have new enough pots in it. And they walk through the battlefield in outrage to escape this town, and some of them die along the way, although some somehow survive. As for the battle, well, the enemy wasted a ton of time destroying that wall on the right, which achieved nothing at all. They then come in with the camel archers, which will have better hope because they can just shoot down our javs, but we have enough javs to deal with this. It's sort of hard to tell when these camel archers are shooting at you because the animation, the little arrow, is tiny. Mainly it's the weird sound effect it makes, but there you go, we defeat the enemy. After this, I decided it's finally time to just add another housing district because it's become too stressful trying to wait for us to somehow win. And the good news is that after that invasion, it says on the right there, no invasions, no one else is on the way. They can still start being on the way later, but this just means we have like years in game before anything bad's gonna happen. So I felt okay making this new housing square in a really exposed spot, not even walling it off. We're not going to protect this area. I just need some more houses. Once we have the houses though, we also need to upgrade them because our prosperity is now too low. The more houses you add, the more your prosperity goes down, unless you're also bringing all of the houses up to standard. So I'm putting that warehouse in to try and encourage some pottery to be imported to this area of the map, and indeed it does work. We get the stuff here. We now have the population score that we need, but we still don't have the prosperity even after the upgrades. The prosperity kind of lags behind how prosperous your town really is, so over time your prosperity sort of trends towards where it should be, but it takes a while. So after 10 minutes of waiting, I decided to just put it on 500% speed and see if it would eventually happen at some point, watching our little ants crawling around down there doing whatever they're doing. And the long story, slightly shorter, is that it eventually worked. Boom, we are now pro-console. We're out of this not very nice map. Well, I think that stage went good enough. We didn't have to restart the stage, and I'm not going to be able to say the same for the next stage. Although things went really well to begin with. Let's take a look. We're here somewhere in the northeastern part of the Roman Empire fighting the Goths. We've got this map that's covered in native territories and tribes. although we now know they're easy enough to deal with, so I'm not really worried about these guys. The worrying setup is where the farmland is. A lot of it is up on this high ground, where we need to wall off some wolves as well, and that's going to make it hard to get a town to have labour access to this location without just straight up building a town on the farmland and losing the farmland. Plus, the only water source is in the middle, so we have to do something creative with reservoirs if we want to get a water source up onto that high ground. What I did is sit here for quite a long time planning. This was the first time I really planned for a long time in advance how the town was going to go, because now I've got sufficient knowledge of the sort of end game of the economy. I kind of know what I'm going to need later. And in particular, I wanted to do this thing that I alluded to before, where we don't have a housing square, we have a housing rectangle of sorts, because I had become convinced you could use fewer service buildings to cover a larger population. So here I am very carefully trying to set up where this rectangle should be. I need to move it slightly down and right from here to leave a space at the very top corner so a road can go around the edge. So yes, the idea is that we'd use fewer service buildings to have almost twice as many people in a housing block. Now before, I've talked about the fact that overproducing service buildings is kind of good, because it's something for your people to do, it's good for unemployment. But I now know that towards the end of the economy, the amount of stuff you need to provide for your people makes it such that the housing squares actually do run out of people to sustain themselves to some extent. We actually had problems with a lack of people, with underemployment in the previous map. So now I'm thinking, can we get around that by simply having fewer buildings to upkeep and having this sort of cool looking central area where that middle space of the rectangle can just all be gardens or statues or something. It will look very regal in the end. That's the idea, and we're also going to try and use that particular placement of the rectangle to get 2 farming districts going right next to it for a decent food supply. Will this plan work? Well, I already mentioned it possibly isn't, although we'll see actually, it's not quite as black and white as I imply. As part of my grand planning, I had this idea that I'll eventually need to have reservoirs up in the very top corner of the map, going around behind these cliffs, to get a water supply up onto the cliffs, because I was thinking I'm probably going to build a town up there at some point. For this, I'm doing this very stupid aqueduct setup, because I've positioned my original rectangle in such a way that the aqueduct can't run close to the cliff and take a short route to go to the other side of it. I'm taking this very long route, trying to leave spaces because I thought I'll probably build into this area later as well. So I end up leaving this sort of square area and then immediately thinking, is that big enough to put a housing square in it? And the answer is, well, not really, no. So we then delete half the aqueduct and put it back in an even bigger square. And this costs money, by the way. You don't get any money back if you delete a building after making it or anything like that. So we just lost like half of the remaining money that I had to do that. And now I can finally put down a normal housing square. I wanted a normal square because I really wasn't sure this rectangle was going anywhere good. We can see here a bit later, half the rectangle was upgraded, the other half is only now being upgraded, and that was only achieved by adding a second market, exactly the sort of thing I didn't want to do. But most of the other service buildings do seem to be able to cover the whole of the rectangle. What we need really is range markers or something. This is a game where you could probably trial and error your way into finding the ideal housing district shape, and I suppose this is me doing that. The problem is, I'm doing it in a campaign stage, not in a sandbox mode or a throwaway save or anything. So really it's a bad time to be experimenting, and I didn't like, in the end, the entire rectangle idea. Not necessarily because it doesn't work, but because I didn't know that it worked, and I didn't want to have to worry about it. Basically, I found it stressful, and that's part of the reason that we'll see I abandon the idea shortly. Here's another idea I wanted to try out. Can I make a really small housing district that's not going to be too unequal? We need to have some services provided to these houses here. But with these houses here, we can now utilize loads of this farm area. So I thought this would be the decisive move to get loads of food production going, because we are having problems with food right now. But it's just a struggle to put services here. We have to put some of the services on top of the farmland, unfortunately. I'm also going to go over here and delete a couple of temples. That's because I've put 2 new temples in this tiny district. Your shacks need 1 temple to level up past being shacks. But if you just put 1 temple down, you'll have 1 god who's being praised too much, basically, and the other gods get mad. So you kind of need to make all of the temples at once every time you make a temple. So that's why I was deleting temples there, to keep the temple count equal. Now a bit later, here's that setup sort of done. It wasn't working especially well, and here's what I decided to do next. Whoops, it's all gone. There's a button that lets you just go back to the start. Because having done that, and having sat there planning my best and realizing my plan wasn't very good after enacting it, I thought, let's just try again. But this time we're going to play things differently, and we're going to play them a bit safer. I'd also come up with, while looking at my terrible farm setup, a better way to do the farm town idea. Plus, I was sort of mad that I'd wasted all of my money doing stupid waterworks stuff and reworking it. I essentially ended up with a better idea, so we've rage quit the other save. I'm not saying that save wouldn't have worked eventually. I'm just going to start the town again, and we'll talk about what I do differently this time. Of course, one thing we do the same is we need to wall off those wolves as soon as possible to stop them from harassing people. Then we go about my master plan, which is here. There's actually a place that's a little bit less inefficient to build on in the farmland, but you can only see it if you delete all of the trees in the farmland, so this is me after having done that. There's this infertile patch towards the middle. The way fertility works near yellow grass, it probably still would be possible to put farms on this area, but it feels like less of a waste to put a housing square here. And in particular, I'm doing a small housing square, the sort of square I was using on the desert maps. We know this still vaguely works, it's just a bit worse than the usual one because it's harder to put service buildings in. And putting it in farmland means that space is more dear than ever, so it's going to be very hard for us to keep the poverty out of this square. But the square will have great food production potential. I also had to move the fountain 1 square closer to the water so that this new reservoir can reach it. We basically messed up the water planning again. I just can't deal with water, it seems. So now this fountain placement looks a bit weird, but it does still cover all of that square. So we've got our housing block here. This will allow us to farm most of this farmland right here. We'll need another one towards the right-hand side to do all of it, basically. But that's good enough. We can then throw in some industry to make this small mini-town make some money. I unstopped time, which is always a mistake, and realized that one of the wolves wasn't trapped here, so we have to hunt them down quickly and re-wall them again. Just a bit of a waste of money. I then looked around to see if there would be another one that had somehow gotten free of my time freeze wall technique, and indeed there was over here. With this guy, I needed to actually wait a few seconds before walling him off, because what we don't want to do is wall him off while he's in native territory, because then the natives would start coming to attack us for disturbing them. Well, we get away with that. Now what I also want to do is set up another square right at the start of the stage, because I want to also use that other farmland up those steps, and here I am setting up the much more efficient way to get water to the other side of these cliffs. Still clearly planning at some point on doing something back there, but this looks much better, it's much cheaper, and I was much happier with this situation basically. We're going for a slightly less stressful version of the same map, with normal house squares and less insane waterworks. Well, still pretty stupid, I imagine. And I'll add one more thing about my decision to restart the stage, which perhaps isn't quite obvious, but this is, I think anyway at the time of recording, the penultimate stage. The stage after this is the last level according to the salary tree. That's where I'm making that deduction from. So that means I wanted this city to be perfect, basically. I want a town that if I need to, I can sit here and grind cash to be as rich as possible for the final stage. That meant I was willing to put loads of my own cash into this town to make it a cash cow for the next town. Because we're approaching the end of the game, we don't really need to save up cash anymore, so it's time to go big, and with this town I hope to go so big that the next town after this isn't really hard. That's what I was hoping for. Here's a little trick I decided to try, although I don't have any way of knowing whether this works. I've roadblocked off this one stretch of road. We're going to put engineers and prefectures down here so that nothing on this road will get destroyed. And then I'm going to spam the entire thing with these larariums, which are a mod-added building that works a bit like an oracle in the base game, which is a temple to all of the gods, which has the benefit of not only taking up not much space, well, each building doesn't anyway, but they don't require employees. So the idea is I can have this area off on a limb, as long as it doesn't burn down or anything. It will just sit there generating god prestige, and they'll like us more. Because we don't know exactly how much the gods like us, we can't tell how much of a difference that's making. But maybe for the rest of the stage, things will go a bit better religiously because of that, I don't know. Now I just had to sit back and allow my town to start working, and I very rapidly discovered that my grand dream of building most of the town on the first frame and then just letting it play out is a terrible idea for various reasons. Essentially, we need to get past the food supply barrier to get people into the town. You can see here we have minus 500 employment slots, meaning we need that many more people to operate the town as it is. And because we have so few people, everything sort of works in slow motion when you don't have many people in the town. So it's taking a really long time to get the food supply started. There aren't many people on the farms. Some people are doing completely useless things like manning the temples or the schools or something. So it took us forever to get beyond the first tier of building, and this ends up most likely being much slower than gradually building things as you need them. It just felt like it was going to be fun to do it this way. It was a disaster. So we've probably learned a lesson or something there. It was actually going so badly I had to add another housing district, which required me to give myself a bunch of money as well, just so I had some more people coming in to set up tents, hoping that would speed up everything a little bit. In particular, on the god topic from earlier, we do need to get enough employees to run the temples, otherwise the gods will hate us and then they'll intervene. That thing on the right where it says 3 lightning bolts under gods means 3 of them are considering doing something bad to me right now. So we need to get this place up and running as soon as possible, especially when it comes to money as well. Doing things like this costs a load of money, and it takes forever to get your money making generation process going, because it's going to be a long time until we have enough people to make furniture, which is what we'll be selling, and a few weapons too as well. But I think we still pay money for having the buildings that should be generating those things even while they're not generating it, which might go to explain why we end up going through 2 debt floors. We actually got the first loan off screen, and then we've now got the second loan where Caesar hates you, your money is negative. We can resolve things instantly by just giving myself the money from my own bank account. But still, things are going pretty poorly. It's just a matter of time until they start working, so we just have to wait, and we're actually almost there now. It will start working eventually, and once we do have some spare people, we rejoin the natural progression by beginning to add pottery with the spare people, so that we can go beyond the first tier of house and get into the prosperous area of the housing tree. Then we can start taxing people for some decent cash and stuff, and all of our industry will work. So we're moving towards having something stable here at last after a sloppy start, which I mostly cut out, but it just took a while. Now here's the first military action. We have a native uprising coming from the southwest. I'd actually walled off 3 directions towards the town, not the 4th one for some reason, I think because I was running out of cash when I was building the walls. And this happens to be the most walled off of the directions that we have. So it's good that they attacked from here, essentially, that's what I'm saying. Although I'd put my military units far away, so it takes them a while to show up. We're saved by the fact that the enemy are taking it in turns to walk forwards, so their unit takes forever to get to the wall, even though it was really close to it to begin with. And I'm able to deploy the jabs. However, the jabs at first don't attack. They attack the wolf that's penned in the corner there. That actually proves to be a problem for some reason, as we'll discuss in a second. But they then do turn in and start attacking the natives. There aren't too many of them, so while they're rapidly hacking through the wall, some of them as usual are distracted fighting bits of the wall that don't matter, and we are able to bring them down. So after winning that first mini-battle, I kept hearing death sounds, and eventually realised there's a wolf now on the streets attacking people. One wolf isn't too bad, because eventually enough prefects will sacrifice themselves against it to defeat it. But it was annoying. I started thinking, is one of my pens open somewhere or something? Looks like I even deployed the jabs to hunt this wolf down. And then I started thinking, I'm going to add to the defenses in this area, so I turned the camera to improve this wall section. But while I was doing it, I kept hearing the wolf killing people sound. And then eventually, I saw a wolf really near to this wall. You can see it sort of behind those temples down there. I think I rotate the camera here. There we go. You can sort of see a prefect fighting a wolf down there. And I was thinking, where are these wolves coming from? That can't be the same one from before, because I definitely killed that one. The wolf appears to start eating the prefecture or something. I don't know. I think it's spawn camping the prefects. Well, we'll kill it eventually. But the main lesson here is that the wolves are coming from somewhere really near this area. So I actually just sat here and stared at the screen, not moving the camera, hoping to see another wolf show up so I would know what's going on. And boom, did you see it there? It spawns just behind my line of larariums and then gets shot by the ballista instantly. So that's the spawn point for wolves. So by taking out the wolves that were penned outside, they now start to regenerate, but they regenerate infinitely and inside the town. That's not very useful. I had worked out that wolves can regenerate, but I figured they were coming from the edge of the map. No, they just sort of appear, and we're close enough to the edge of the map that now they appear behind our defences. Well, at least in this case, they should always appear right below the ballista tower and get shot instantly because they can't move right away, it seems, when they appear, and the ballista shoots fast enough to kill them. Not really an ideal setup, not quite happy with that, but it should do. And at the time of recording, I haven't seen any more wolves getting loose. It's just every minute or so in game, a new wolf will appear and get killed. There goes one just there. And we just have to deal with that sound effect in the background, basically. Now we're going to look at an attack coming in. I was able to build pretty close to this enemy attack. Normally it wouldn't let you put in a wall so close to where the enemy are, but it seems to be generous today, and that's good because we have very little in the way of defences on this side of the map, just because I hadn't done it yet basically, so better late than never. At least we are close to our forts, so we can deploy the troops here pretty easily. I tried putting the javs in this little sandwich section in the middle of the walls, but I fell back because the enemy came over with tons of horse archers who can easily just take us out in that little channel. So I need to instead put the javs behind the legionaries. We learned this back at the start of this video, I think it was. That legionaries can do this thing where their little sprite changes when they're under missile fire, and I like to believe this means they are protected against that missile fire in some way. We have no actual evidence of that, of course, but, well, belief is all you can do in the Zen no-numbers gaming space. Well, the enemy do break through the walls here, and the legionaries will now somewhat hold them back, while our javs provide some fire support, but of course the enemy's horse archers are just raining arrows all over this melee. So I'm guessing our legionaries are somewhat protected because they're not dying as much as they should be under this relentless bombardment. At least that's what I think. So maybe we're good now. We can have the legionaries push forwards, just tanking all of the enemy's arrows, and the javs will throw javs at the horse archers. The issue is, once we get a bit too close, the horse archers charge in and start fighting in melee, and they're actually able to take out the entire unit of legionaries, the few survivors rout, and this thing turns into a ranged battle, the horse archers versus the javs. It feels like we're in trouble here, because of the sheer rate of fire of the horse archers. You can hear from the sound effects that they're just machine gunning towards us, and indeed they do take out most of our units, the rest routs. And that was that. Now it's like, well, what do I do from here? The answer is die. These horse archers can now just maraud into the town and do whatever they want, really. And what they want is to take out a slice of our food production infrastructure. At least they do go and harass our javs over at the fort, which is okay because the javs standing on the fort square might do some damage back during the melees that ensue there. And they didn't run all the way through the town or something, which I thought they might do. I'm trying here to put prefectures down, because spawning a few extra prefects may allow us to fight the enemy off. But what actually happens is they try to withdraw, so that helps. I guess we killed so many of them that now the few survivors had low morale or something, so their unit routes. And off they go, and I help them go by deleting the walls there to get them out sooner. Very nice. So we sort of survived that. We did lose buildings, so our peace score will be damaged, but the buildings were sort of surplus to requirement, so that's something. We didn't really need those extra farms and the extra granary. We'll just put stuff back here quickly and bounce back to where we were before. And we'll need to do something about our defences over there, because of course that was the first wave of enemies, and that's always the weakest wave, so it's only going to get worse. That means we're going to need to put some housing districts over here. This will also allow us to use more of the farmland over here as well, so I wanted to put one here anyway. So we'll have this district here that will focus on defending from the south. There's also the north here, a nice pass through the mountains, which will surely be used by the enemy soon. So we'll need to defend that as well. There's our new setup. That looks a bit neater, got some towers and such as well. And for the other pass, here comes the other housing district. This one's going to be a bit more complicated though, because the native village is there, and we need to keep the roads there so that our missionaries will keep walking towards the native houses to keep them on side. That limits what we can do with defences in this little pass, which is annoying. We also need to leave the wolf preserve intact in the top right there. Well, we'll see about that. The next bad thing that happens in the west, because it turns out that native uprisings can enter the map from this direction. I don't know what causes native uprisings, by the way. You don't get any warning about these, which you do get with the main invasions. And I think that's a little bit of a problem because these native attacks are powerful. I was so sure that the enemy wouldn't really come from this direction that I had not put many defences in. I threw up some cheap palisades which holds the enemy for about 2 seconds. And then in they come to the town. And what you'll quickly see is that these guys are much stronger than normal enemy troops. They run about faster, they can't be killed by ballista bolts because they're so fast, and they destroy buildings instantly. When they touch buildings, the buildings are destroyed. So we're in huge trouble. The only hope we have now is that we do have some troops who walked over here in the streets who will lock down some of the enemy, and our prefects and sentries wandering around might sometimes kill them as well. Overall, it's a bit of a mess, and we already lost a massive amount of the town. Even just losing the Senate is a big blow because it's really expensive to have a Senate in your town, so we'll have to rebuild that dearly. I could just not have a Senate, but I wanted one. That's how arbitrary I was. What I really want to do is rebuild things to exactly the way they were before because that's the way I liked it, god damn it. So we're going to spend all of our money basically. As the enemy are repulsed, it happens again, and it happens over here as well, and as you can see, I had not put the new walled defences in yet. I've set up the town to do it. I just hadn't actually put the walls in, maybe because of economic concerns, I don't know. But we have no defences here. Not that having defences here would make a massive difference, but this just feels very vulnerable right now. So I ended up going to my personal account again and pulling out some more cash, starting to actually run out of that infinite cash reserve I was relying upon for this stage. And we'll put some walls in here. This will delay the enemy for at least 2 seconds. Soon, they're in. I've also put down millions of prefectures, as you can see, so we'll have loads of cops on the streets in this area. That will delay the enemy a bit as well. What I wanted was for the enemy to come to the left, so I could use the palisades I set up there to defend with my troops. However, they mainly went to the right, so we are just screwed. And again, the natives can just destroy everything they touch. The buildings go down real fast, and our houses going down too is going to start causing big issues. We already have minus 500 on the employment score, so we're severely lacking stuff, and that's going to make us lose more people basically because we need the employment to keep the services going that retain the existence of other employees. Well, that's, I suppose, not so much of an issue when simply being immediately killed by a crazy topless guy with a sword marauding about the street is the main concern of the day. Our ballistas are trying to shoot at them and missing because, as mentioned, the natives run too fast and the ballistas don't lead their target, so they really only hit slow or stationary targets. And this native invasion goes all the way through the town. It attacks all of the different districts, destroying things here and there. It's all a disaster, and as mentioned, once they've destroyed enough, they sort of have a knock-on effect where the lack of services causes all of the houses to devolve. I'm essentially just sacrificing all of my troops in the hopes of somehow killing the enemy and just keeping them in melee at least so they're not running about. And we do lose everything in that engagement. The enemy eventually die off, but the invasion is still happening. The music has changed, meaning the main invasion is over, but the natives still in the town are the ones that spawned on map. So that invasion was an off-map native attack. Now the on-map native attack is happening. That is because we now have minus 700 employment, and that's so few people left in the town that people aren't manning the missionary posts. that means, the fact that our town is on top of native villages, means we're constantly fighting natives. At this stage, I was so frustrated. We've got no money left, we just went through a whole bunch of crap, and I was like, damn, I just want to cry. Why am I being attacked so much? Well, there is still a way to get out of this situation, it's just not going to be pretty. We need to move what employees we do have into, I think it's health and education, that's the category that missionary posts are in. So with that, the native attacks will stop, but of course we still have to finish off all the guys that spawned before I realized that and did it. And they destroyed the town again, which I'd just rebuilt. I pulled the vast majority of the remaining money out of my personal account to get enough cash to start rebuilding the town yet again, and then we'll gradually wait for the people to come back and maybe things will be okay after that. But yes, we've spent well over 20 grand of my personal cash here, meaning that we need to make loads of money from this stage now to have any chance of having spare money to take into the next stage, where presumably I need it. We're also seeing the knock-on effects of the invasion, because they took out prefectures and engineer stations around the place, and because I don't remember where they were, most importantly. We end up seeing things collapse due to lack of services, and not knowing where things were and what all these ruins used to be is actually a big issue. I think I would prefer it if it was like the dreaded game Anno 1800, where once something was destroyed, the ruin told you what it used to be, so you can just put it straight back. Now I need to remember what my setup from before was to successfully reproduce it and avoid any issues. Well, we can probably get rid of some of those prefectures at least at some point to free up some employees, we'll do that. And here we are a bit later, the housing is back, we're back on track, and I just about avoided running out of money, although we're getting to the point where now, because we've gone through all of the debt floors, we've gone through our personal funds, we just need to actually make this work now. There are no more crutches. We need to sell some furniture and try to keep this town alive, maybe tax these people, and just hope we don't get attacked again, because we can't afford to have another disaster at this stage. Welcome then to the next disaster. So what's going on this time? Well, it seems the village in the south of the map is sending an infinite stream of natives to attack me again. Well, the native risk factor appears okay here. You'll see at the very top of the screen in a second what the actual problem is that I missed while playing. There's a speck of native risk somewhere else. Well, we'll get to that. For now, we're being attacked for some reason. And of course, it's once again destroying everything instantly. At least there are only a few of them at a time, so it's less instant destruction. What I can do is get the legionaries into their mop-up formation. That will make them wander the streets looking for the natives, and that will contain them a bit. And I'm going to battle to try and keep the water supply to the town at the bottom right going, which fails because for whatever reason, the natives really loved going for one particular spot in the aqueduct. So we kept losing it. Well, I've put 3 mission posts down at this village now, but they're still deploying troops against me. I could actually deploy my javs to block the route, that might have helped here. But I was just wondering, why is this happening at all? Is there another reason why the natives might attack you other than you're on their land? Well, here's me eventually discovering the problem. We've managed to get one of the houses not allied to us, and it's because of that gate I've put next to the mission post. I was slapping down walls here, hoping to increase the defensibility of that weak point in our defences. But as we're going to learn now, the palisade gates also act like roadblocks, and that means missionaries can't pass through them, so I actually stopped the missionaries from ever going to the south end of that road, causing the house that's in our wall system to rebel, and for whatever reason, the rebels then spawned on the other side of the map in the other village. So that was unexpected. But now we're going to start putting things back together, quite literally in many cases. Again, I have to remember what all the buildings we lost actually were to try and maintain all of the services, but we can get through that with trial and error. And we've learned another lesson about Caesar 3, or at least about the mod, I should say in this case, because this is a mod feature, the Palisade Gates doing that. Now the Emperor wants to take my troops, further weakening my potential defences here in this sector. This is the part I was very worried about, but luckily enough, after sending off this force, there were no invasions until they came back, so we're fine here. which is good because it said they wanted an average force, and I interpreted that to mean I need to send 3 units, because 6 is the max, 3 is thus the average, so I thought I'll send an average amount of units, which left me with basically nothing, but as mentioned, we just happen to be fine, so we get away with that. Now what am I doing here? It's finally time for me to get back on that project from earlier, my dream of having aqueducts going to the other side of this mountainous area so we can do something wild with them. And now at last we're doing it. We're going to have to wall off a massive channel to contain the aqueduct as well, so that's annoying, but I still wanted to do it. We've got plenty of money to waste, at least at this stage. And stuff is getting destroyed in the town again. Why is it happening this time? Well, it's for a very similar reason. It's this house down here in another wall that's rebelling this time. And it's not because of that gate next to it. I'd specifically set the gate to allow the missionaries to pass through it. It's actually because I've put that roadblock right next to the gate, and that roadblock tile is not allowing the missionaries to walk on it. So they can't quite get close enough to placate the house, it seems. I don't know why that roadblock was there or what the general plan is, but at some point I changed something here and things got messed up, which is the general Caesar 3 effect. Never change anything. And when in doubt, do something stupid like that. I'm just going to dedicate a missionary post to that house in particular. Now we won't have this problem. Clearly I was getting fed up with the things going wrong in that regard, so I'm just going to brute force a solution there. Well, we've also got my dream water network set up at last. There's a reservoir in this weird corner back here, and all that allows me to do is put some fountains up here in the mountainous farmland. We're going to delete that little forest in the middle to make a nice space for putting a housing district, and there was one highlighted tile that seems to suggest I should put the fountain right there, so I do. Now we have a water supply going up there. This doesn't really work because the whole point of the reservoir is to get the water above the place where it needs to go, but we're still below the place where it needs to go, or at least that's how it looks. So we just need a really tall reservoir, I guess. Caesar 3 has terrible hydraulic physics, but we'll let it off the hook for that. So we've got this little district going here now, and we're actually going to start getting towards the population goal. We're thinking about finishing the stage at this stage. There's one weird thing going on in this part of town though. You can see I've walled off this random section next to the amphitheater. That's because we've got another infinite wolf spawn, as it turns out, in this area. They're spawning right here. My ballistas can't actually see the wolf here, but the watchtower nearby can shoot through the amphitheater, so that's nice. However, it's extremely weak. It takes tons of arrows from this tower to bring down a wolf, and because those watchtowers take the same number of employees as a ballista tower, I was disappointed to see how weak they really are. I couldn't really tell how weak they were before. Well, it's time for another major fight, because the Dacians, I suppose, are back at it again. But this time, as they attack from the southeast, we've got much better defences than before. We've got all of our troops back now, and more troops. Our ballista towers aren't going to be helping us in this fight for the reason we discussed in the previous video. Most of the time, they can't shoot over walls that are in front of them, but sometimes they can, and in this case, they can't. There was some drama though, as we saw there. It said that a local uprising is also taking place on the other side of the map, so that made me think I need to rush back. But it also said the spirit of Mars is here to protect us, and when I clicked the Go To button it showed me the Dacians, so I thought maybe Mars is going to kill the Dacians and give me some leeway to rush back and fight the natives who are almost certainly going to break in because the direction they're coming from is barely defended. However, it turned out the natives possibly died on the way in or were the ones actually killed by Mars, because for whatever reason we don't see any action over there. We do see a couple of skeletons on the ground, so what happened I don't know. Things were about to go very wrong and then they didn't, and it might be simply due to the favour of the gods, so we shall simply praise the gods and carry on. Mars has saved me once again. At least our defences are strong enough to defeat the main Dacian invasions now, so that's all looking good. Here's a battle coming in from the southwest, where the fact I've put a wall up here is essential because it takes so long for me to deploy my troops to this specific place that they only just arrive in time to fight with that wall there. So if the wall hadn't been there, we probably would have lost this palisade already and enormous trouble would have ensued. So it paid off just randomly, doubly walling off places to buy time. It totally does the business. Now we have what looks like a chaotic fight where there are enemies everywhere. They do break through the palisade and I don't do a very good job of shuffling the jabs back to not be in melee. We're saved mainly here by the fact that the legionaries are probably invincible to the horse archers' attacks. This is my guess, because when they're being shot by arrows they never seem to die. So while we end up facing this huge ball of horse archers after slogging our way through the enemy infantry, we can just sit back and let the Javs gradually rain jabs on the horse archer blob. The Javs, by the way, seem to have wildly inconsistent range, and again, it's based on what direction they're facing as far as I can tell how far they can throw the Javs. I think there's some interesting calculations with the diagonals in a square-based game going on, but anyway, we take out that block is all I'm saying, and it goes a bit better than it looked like it was going. Now here's my next pointless plan. As well as the invasions, we have to deal with the local uprisings, where it just spawns an invasion with no warning. And I thought maybe if I treat the locals better, that won't happen. This is my new theory. So I'm throwing down these lovely trees in the nearby village. We're going to forcibly gentrify them in some way, and maybe they'll think this is better. As you can see here, their village is now extremely desirable, on par with my own town districts. So that's pretty good. Does this do anything? I'm almost certain that it doesn't, but I had so much money I was willing to try. In fact, the next time we're attacked, it is a native uprising, so I guess it doesn't work out to the extent that I want it to. We mentioned earlier that the natives are really good at killing buildings, but they do seem to struggle against the stone walls. It takes them forever to get through them, and I wonder if that's a deliberate balancing choice. They have something in their code that makes them specifically bad against walls, so that it is easier to wall yourself off against natives. Well, in this case, Mars just kills them all, so that's fine. Here's the next large battle back over in the southwest, where I've got even more walls delaying the enemy this time, so we're in position ready to fight. And the walls, as we've mentioned before, also have the role in that they break the AI. We're actually being attacked by a lot of stuff here, but most of it isn't really doing anything. Look at all those horse archers riding into the wall. If that ball of horse archers was also up at the front shooting into the Javs, they might be able to cut down the Javs, which would stop me doing my plan of standing here and letting them just get tons of DPS off over time. But instead, most of the horse archers, most of the time, don't do anything, and eventually we advance behind the Testudo legionaries to take out the survivors. So while we constantly lose the walls, it's definitely a worthy sacrifice. The power of just sacrificing stone walls in melees is, well, it's completely broken basically. And I feel like throughout the game I've been relying on military exploits. It feels like we shouldn't really be winning these fights, it's just that things always break. Well, we've got a test of that now because the Emperor wants a large force for something. So for that I decided to send 4 out of our 6 legions. That seems like a large force to me, not really sure what it means of course. So now we have to fight with only 2 legions. In practice, this invasion faces only 1 because the legionaries are so far away as the invasion comes in. They don't arrive in time, so we've got 1 unit of Javs holding off this enemy army. But again, look at what the enemy army is doing. Nothing for the most part. They're fighting in the wrong direction, they're distracted by the walls, a couple of them sometimes shoot arrows at us, but it's not enough to overcome our rain of Javs. And there's another sort of small benefit that is hard to notice, but if you build right on the edge of the map, it means that when the enemy come in, they aggro instantly, whereas if there's nothing nearby, they gradually build up their strength on the edge of the map, because they don't all come onto the map at the same time during the invasion. So by making anything that comes onto the map aggro right away, you're more likely to face small groups of enemies one at a time than everything at once. At least that's how it seems to be to me. So in this case, with only 1 unit of Javs, we defeat everything there, or they defeat themselves just running pointlessly against the walls. And that is that. It looks like this town is pretty safe. Our peace score is almost high enough for us to win. All I need to do now is keep my culture low, which I can do by just not allowing buildings to operate, increase my salary to max. Caesar likes us a lot, so I felt okay having a salary that's too high right now. And then we grind for cash, which as mentioned is the ultimate purpose of this town. We've got a town that's really rich, really safe-ish anyway, and should be able to last a long time. We're going to throw down more pointless walls out here because we've got the money, and it really does seem to make a surprisingly large difference, possibly more cost-effective to do weird wall exploits than to hire troops at all. This feels like we're reaching the pinnacle of Caesar 3 gameplay. Well, like the last time I wanted to grind for cash, I decided to build the Grand Temple of Mars because it acts as a second barracks. If there was a military disaster and we lost most of our stuff, this will effectively double the speed at which we can get that stuff back. we can also use its secondary blessing here to reduce the consumption of everything by 10%. Well, that sounds good for the economy. We don't need to do that at this stage, but it's probably a good idea. We're also being attacked by some natives right now, so just need to go and deal with that minor kerfuffle. We have enough javs now to easily cut them down, so that's all fine because our force came back from whatever they were doing for the Emperor. Now I decided to try and make this temple actually function. Because it's too far away from our housing districts, I need to put a house next to it to allow it to have employees. And we confirmed there that there is a sort of global employment system. One tent with 7 people in it provides the 50 employees this thing needs. So buildings just need access to labor as a general concept, and then they can drag people from wherever they want. So we've got a sort of hybrid system of the Anno 1800 style labor teleports everywhere system, and what I thought the game was doing, where specific people needed to live where or near where they worked. It feels like it kind of has to be like this because the ranges on buildings are too low for it to work otherwise, so maybe that's just a balancing choice from the developers to make this system operate. Decided to actually provide those 2 tents I was putting down with a bunch of services as well because I was very nice. I could just leave them sitting there, but they would constantly rebel due to inequality, of course. Here comes another wave of enemies, and we're just doing this in fast motion. Our jabs cut down the enemy and that's all fine. So it's not necessarily the enemy that's going to cause us issues with my plan to grind here. After the battle, we see that my employment level goes down. We suddenly need 50 employees, even though I didn't do anything. We didn't add any people or lose any units or anything like that. So I thought, why is that happening? And it actually didn't take me very long to find out because I had a creeping suspicion about what it might be. It's in here. Look at our census. Our population has some absolutely cursed age demographics. Yes, the game actually keeps track of age demographics in the background, and our people are essentially quite old. We're all middle-aged in this town because the initial wave of settlers comes in, I guess, at a young age. And because the town is then full, maybe they can't reproduce, and you tend not to get children arriving in your towns. So we have very few young people, basically no children at all, and this huge pyramid of people is just going to slide into retirement/death off to the right, and our workforce is going to disappear. How bad is that? It's catastrophic, as it turns out. This is 5 years later in the town after sitting back and grinding for cash. We're short 1,000 employees, and as the employee count goes down, the production of things starts to slide as well. So we lose pottery, for example, and all of our houses start downgrading, and we've lost 1,000 people in our population because our people take a very strong stance about the issue of decommodification of the pottery supply. They must have free supplies of pottery provided by the state at all times, and they would literally rather walk out of their house with no possessions and go off into the wilderness than live in a house that does not have unlimited free pottery. So they're making their point known here. This society will not operate outside of the absolute utopian economic philosophy that they desire. This Roman Empire needs to be as good as possible. Well, in response to that, I'm going to go back in time, which is the main way rulers deal with unruly civilians. We go back in time to a slightly earlier save, just before this demographic collapse, although it's already starting to happen in this save. We've got 30 grand saved up. I wanted more than that, because that was about the amount I came into this stage with in the first place. I wanted to come out this stage with like 50 grand at least, so we're totally rich for the next stage and can just do whatever we want, no matter what the challenge ends up being. Well, that's probably not going to happen. So I need to use what employees we do still have to very quickly man all of the culture-producing buildings like schools, theatres, academies and libraries, so that we quickly get some culture score and can complete the stage before anything bad happens. We can essentially do this by not having people work on food supply or industry for a while. It doesn't matter right now to produce goods because we're going to just bounce as soon as possible. Another great governing strategy. When your term's almost over, nothing matters. Just get the numbers up and leave. Somebody else will deal with the fallout. And as we lose hundreds of people right as the collapse is happening, we're also promoted out of this disastrous position. We've done it. So we are now Caesar, apparently, although not quite, because there is still another guy called Caesar giving us orders, and he's going to be ordering us into the final stage of the game. Let's take a look at what we're working with here. The final stage of Caesar 3. When I was a boy, I could never have dreamed of seeing such a thing as this, but here it is. It's a very open map, where it's not immediately obvious where the enemy will come from, so we need to take that into account. But I came to my own conclusions, as I usually do, and this time it wasn't too disastrous, as we'll see. One clue I had, I suppose, about where the enemy might come from is where this map is supposed to be in the world. We're up at the very top left of the empire at Lindum. We are building Lindum, aka York, one of the big cities here in Britannia. So I figured the enemy will probably come from the top of the screen. Basically, that's the logic. Now, in terms of the economy here, there are loads of trading options, which makes the economy real easy, in particular because you can sell the raw products for other things that you can sell. So we're just going to be producing things that are worth money to us constantly all over the place. You can see me here though, pausing, because after I started building a little town next to the water here, I had other ideas immediately. Essentially, I need to get the dock access on the water close to those mountains towards the top, because we're going to be selling iron abroad, and we need that to be happening fast because we can sell absolutely loads of it on this map. And I learned before that with sea trade, it's really the speed at which you're physically putting things on the boats that determines how much you can sell, rather than the limitations on how much they'll buy. So anyway, I was having second thoughts, but I ended up with this 2-square setup. Both squares will have great access to resources, they can both make food for themselves, and will be able to make pottery and furniture, plus the wood and clay, all of which we can sell. So already this setup is going to be in the money, and we've got plenty of money to burn. And we're going to burn some of it right now with this new experiment I had in mind. In the previous stage, we did something with these larariums, the mod-added god-worshipping thing that worships all the gods a little bit at the same time. And I thought, maybe we don't need this to be in any way integrated into the town. Can I just put this off on the edge of the map here? Because the only requirement these things seem to have is that they need to be near a road. So I've put them on a road, we'll see what happens. We're also going to set up this second dock district here. This is to be near the mountains, as I said, because we need a fast flow of iron from left to right on the screen to get it on the ships as fast as possible, and even putting down a second dock might be worth it here, but we just need to save our employment for the start of the mission. Once we get some food, things will be fine. And here we are with the results of the lararium experiment. It doesn't work, because while it turns out they can't set on fire, so they don't need prefects to patrol near them, they can just randomly collapse, so they need engineers to be near them. That means they need to be near houses to staff the engineer posts. So we do have to actually put these things in the town. As it turns out, we can't do a massive exploit thing in the corner. A shame. Now here we are moving on a bit further to when I've got my third square set up on the left, and the original squares are now pretty upgraded since we're going to be producing for trade the same things they need to upgrade, so it's very easy to get to a middling tier of house on this map. But we are now being attacked. It's time to see what happens when the locals show up. We have no defenses, as you can see, so I'm going to stop time and very quickly try to wall off the town. It looks like they're coming from the left side of the screen, so I'm going to prioritize walling off this area in general. Even though they're actually not on the map yet, it already restricts where I can build. So it seems the enemies, while in the fog of war, the black area off the map, still project their no building field. I have to draw from my own account to make these defenses because we're wasting tons of cash on it. But we have tons of cash to waste. We've already made the preparations for such emergency builds as this, so this is all fine. We have 1.5 units of Javs and half a unit of legionaries to use, which is going to be more than enough to stop this early invasion. It's just a few enemies. I think they threw in this no warning native invasion to catch people off guard who were in my exact situation, having focused on economy and not walled off the town at all. However, I had infinite money to play with and can stop time, 2 powers which resolve many problems in life, so we're fine. Now we just sit back because this setup we have right here is going to make us absolutely tons of money. We're producing about the amount that we can sell of everything, so now we just sit back and wait for this to work, and then choose where to make further house squares later to start moving up towards the goal. So far this stage has been much easier than many of the previous stages. Here is the platification of the housing districts just to increase their desirability by making the roads colourful. Another thing to note, by the way, is my waterworks here. I seem to have chosen to supply water to the town on the left using the water on the right, despite there actually being water right next to the town on the left. There is genuinely a reason for that. I set this up to leave more free space between the left housing square and the water nearby, because I was going to use that water to overproduce clay, because we can sell clay as well as pottery, so we need to make more clay than usual. You can see that at the bottom of the screen there, some of the clay production facilities. Anyway, here we are a bit later. We've got tons of cash, and I've spent much of that cash already walling off the entire town, basically splitting the map in two from north to south, because it seems the enemy were going to come from the north, as I said. This group comes from the same place as the natives from before, but I wasn't sure which direction they would go from here. They might go to the east, as the natives did, or they might go to the south, so I was really not sure where to commit my troops to. You can see where I wanted them to go. I want them to go east because the defenses are a bit better. That would be a better place to fight a battle. But I was hedging my bets that they might go south, and it turns out that yes, they're going south, so we have to quickly redeploy there. But as we just saw, a lot of them die instantly thanks to Mars coming in, so that's going to make this less of a disaster if we can't make it back in time. There aren't that many of them anyway. We do have a stupid setup here where the defensive area on the right of the screen isn't connected to the place I need to go on the left. We could put in more gates and a little wall tunnel effectively to get over here faster. Here's another problem we have. After deploying the first unit of Javs in, they're going to prioritize fighting the wolves who are in the walls there, which is not very useful. The wolves take a while to kill, as I've mentioned before, and they're not really a threat right now. Meanwhile, the enemy are taking this really optimal route, sneaking down the very end of the defenses, cutting through the edge of each piece of wall, which allows them to quite quickly get into the town. Luckily, the troops having not arrived yet means they end up in a perfect position to actually plug that gap as they stumble upon it. So that's okay, we can block the enemy there, then the other Javs that are in position will fight all of the stuff that's sort of stuck in the wall system, including a bunch of chariots on this map, which are perhaps easier to face than horse archers, because at least they don't shoot you while they're stuck in the wall system, so it's safer to have the Javs standing around here with no legionaries to tank stuff. And as we can see, the main breakthrough is stopped, the other guys are just sort of stuck getting killed, and we have won this first battle. Since this area was getting so much hassle, I decided to put a housing district right here, right now, so we can set up some towers. A pretty good place for houses too, because even though I'm wasting some farmland, we'll use the part we're not wasting to get food, and there's clay and timber access here, as well as easy water. This is also the prime location to get destroyed, in that it's where the enemy will easiest break through to attack. But maybe they won't, that's the plan, so I was a bit hesitant to build on the edge of our defenses here. There's plenty of space in our back lines, as it were. But anyway, we don't need to do that. You can see we have fortified the entire map quite a lot, but none of these fortifications are being used for anything so far. Well, I was still paranoid that there would be an attack at some point on that side of the map, so I've put my next square in a slightly less useful position over there on the right, so I can put towers on the walls there. We can reconnect this area to the town a bit better though, using this gigantic, expensive bridge. The idea here is that we're going to have the route to the granaries for the granary in the new district be shortened by the presence of this bridge. It also makes it faster for the immigrants to show up as well. At some point I'd gotten rid of the docks on the south bank of this inlet because the trading there was too slow. So we're now going to have another dock up here, and we'll put a warehouse in to import some of the stuff that needs to go out to the sea here, to try and keep that throughput going. As mentioned, it's more about throughput than production or sales capacity with the naval stuff, which isn't immediately obvious, but once you increase throughput, you'll see the money increase basically, so it's worth doing it. Something, something, something. There was some logic behind all of this. And there is somebody using the bridge to get to our new district. That's all good. We actually need to add another housing district to be able to reach the population goal. And here's one of these safe places I mentioned, right at the back. There's still pretty good access to resources here, and there's plenty of space too. We could put a couple of them back here if we need to. But while I was very slowly thinking about doing that by the looks of things, we do get invaded. So let's see what's up with that. This time the attack comes in still on the left side of the map, but not at the place where I just put down those defenses. But they are again also going for this along the mountain chain tactic, which I think is a good idea from the AI, where they try and just sneak along the edge there. This not only gives them a relatively short route to us, but it sort of protects them, because I think our jabs won't always throw over the mountain tiles. Some of the tiles are passable to projectiles, other ones aren't. Something, 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 here they come. Luckily the chariots died in the first wave and we had plenty of guys to take down the second wave, and here I am setting up this anti-mountain walking wall system. Maybe that will do something. Now we come back to business. With this new square, we're not going to mess around. I was sort of playing things slow. I mentioned before that I'd gotten used to playing things slow because it's sort of easier to let time pass and not rush things down. But I kind of realized towards the end of this stage, wait a minute, the end is in sight. We've got tons of money. We can just build everything to complete the stage right now, so I better start building it. And we're also going to build this as well. My Lorarium dream is back, because now this new square allows us to put engineers onto the main road to Rome, so we'll also spam loads of these. As you can see, I discovered you can also have them be too deep, and it doesn't complain that they don't have road access. Adding the Lorariums, by the way, also increases your culture score a little bit as well, so this actually does help with the objective doing this. But the main thing is it just means the gods will never hassle you, because you're always looking pretty good as far as they're concerned. Now here comes the next wave of Britons. They're not going along the edge of the mountains this time, so maybe the plan worked. There are just loads of them, so this is a dangerous attack. We're going to use this space more effectively here. We've got space between our first and second wall layer to sort of have the jabs move behind the legionaries as the wall begins to die. So that might keep them out of melee a bit and keep them shooting as well. We're not benefiting here from distractions. I hadn't put down loads of junk outside of the walls to distract the enemy as we did in the previous stage, so that's a problem really. I should have done that. But still, they're sort of distracted just by the depth of the wall. You might have seen they're not all attacking at once and things like that. Also had another iron mine disaster. Sometimes the clay pits have that as well. Still not sure what causes that. Maybe if you spam more engineers to an area, stuff's less likely to just collapse suddenly like that, but this does seem to be a different collapse system to the normal collapse system which every other building has. Well anyway, while dealing with that, the invasion was defeated, so that's good. Now here's a little subtlety that I didn't appreciate until actually towards the end of the previous stage, and I'm now going to show it for the first time and use this tactic. If you increase the desirability of non-housing areas, sometimes buildings will upgrade to a second form that does more with the same number of employees. It's only a few buildings that this seems to affect. It did say in the manual which ones they were, but I forget. A school is certainly one of them, and it says here it's an upgraded form of the school that gives you more space. And this does matter because they're not just providing schooling to the people nearby. The education system has this secondary layer where you need to have a total number of schools in the city that is possible to fit all of the school children into. That system I think doesn't take into account range, so you can have the schools be anywhere just as long as there is theoretically enough schools. It doesn't matter if people actually go to them, we're just playing the numbers here. So essentially, upgrading school areas with desirability things will increase our culture score because that's partially based on how much of your population is educated. Although we actually already have the culture score that we need right now, so doing this won't actually help, but still making the town better is just fun anyway. Slapping down those big statues here and there is a great way to increase desirability because while they take up loads of room, we have loads of room, and they have a massive range, these big statues, so a big area will be improved by this. You'll see here the bathhouse is another example of something with a secret second tier that's a bit bathy, I suppose. Maybe more people will be considered to be covered by the health benefits of the bathhouse or something with that. So the town is getting better, we just need to not die for a while and we'll basically be there. The culture and prosperity scores are already there, so we don't need to change anything about the town. This town can complete the game. Just a matter of time, need to keep that peace score going up by not letting anything go wrong. As for the favour, we're almost there with favour. We kind of need Caesar to give us an easy quest that we can instantly complete to get more favour. So we're just kind of waiting for that. But there is another way to get favour and we'll see that a bit later. The other thing we've got here, which is quite good, is 300 or so spare people. We've somewhat protected this town against demographic collapse, so when I sit back and just wait for time to pass, it shouldn't cause too many disasters. We've got a buffer against the population getting too old, whenever that's going to happen. I didn't really check in this stage. Well, we'll just see if anything happens. What we don't want is for the Britons to show up and destroy a building, thus ruining our peace build-up. So I say that because here we are in the final battle against the Britons. They sent absolutely billions of troops against us for a somewhat climactic clash here, and they weren't very distracted by all of the random obstacles I left outside the town, so they just come straight on in, their chariots breaking through the walls. I have to fall back to our secondary setup here, where the legionaries defend the first breach, and the Javs sit behind the secondary wall and keep throwing. But with this sheer amount of stuff attacking us here, our legionaries soon just disappear into the enemy formation, they're just gone. And the enemies start breaking through the second wall as well. Inside the town, people are having a great time watching gladiatorial combat, while real combat is happening just outside the walls. We lose all of our legionaries here basically, and now we're in a bit of trouble. So what I need is for the enemy to not walk up to that wall, walk in and destroy anything. So for that, we're going to start kiting the enemy sideways. We want the enemy to keep targeting the Javs, and for the Javs to keep running away. One of them routs in that vein, so that's useful. Still got 2 units left though. And we do draw the enemy mostly over here. A large group of them are also routing, so we actually defeated a lot of the enemy just about. We killed enough of them while sacrificing our legionaries to make the rest of their squads leave. But some are still here. Now we just have to finish off this group. I utilise this little tunnel we've got to another defensive pocket that allows our Javs to escape the area safely and leave behind the enemy to just sort of pointlessly attack the nearby walls, so this stabilises the situation, and more of them seem to rout without me intervening anymore. So while that was dangerous for a second there, it looks like we got away with it. Just having walls everywhere once again pays off. The enemy love attacking walls. I eventually delete some of them and let them leave, and indeed they do just walk off. That was that then. We were saved by the enemy's poor morale, effectively. If they'd pressed that attack, they could have destroyed this entire town for sure. So we now get to the correct peace score. We still don't have the favour, but we can do this. We've still got money left over in our personal account. We can just send Caesar a giraffe. That makes him like us more, and boom, we instantly complete the stage and complete the game. And it says the Roman people declare you to be a god. Well, that appears to be the case because I am the same character throughout the entire game, and it's been many centuries, and here is that character parading to Rome, I suppose, to receive the honours of becoming a god. The actual plot is that you are becoming Caesar, so you're becoming the emperor of the empire, the deathless emperor, I suppose. And here we have an Obama meme-esque scene where the previous emperor, who looks exactly the same as you as it turns out, crowns you the new one. The previous guy retires to have his immortality elsewhere. And there we go, Rome has a new emperor. It's the guy who did those stages in Caesar 3. And the final stage, we basically speedran that stage because the peace score only goes up over time. It's an auto-scroller in speedrunning terminology. We completed that as fast as you can complete it. That was pretty damn good, so an easy end to the game as it turns out. Here I am checking out the other game mode. The other way you can play the game is you just pick a map and build the town on it for your own amusement. And I noticed the list of maps you can do this on. They're a lot more interesting, basically, than the maps in the main game. I don't know if the mod is changing these to make them more interesting. They just seemed a bit more special. Maybe the campaign ones are simple because they're trying to keep things easy for people. Whereas in the sandbox mode it doesn't really matter, so they can make the maps really hard. Like there's the Carthage map, much more interesting than the real Carthage map seen in the previous video. And I also went to look at the Lindum map. So this here is the map of the final stage of the game, but in sandbox mode. This is way harder. Tons of terrain blocking features, the farmland's way harder to use, the map's really small so it's hard to defend, and it's covered in natives and wolves all over the place. So that's a much more fitting final stage. I fled, taking the blessings of the game. I don't want to think that I hadn't really completed the game. I've completed Caesar 3 and I've got video to prove it, so I'm now one of the few Caesar 3 masters of the world confirmed. So here's the end game of the town. I made a save just before sending off those giraffes. This town, of course, will eventually implode, probably for the same reason that the previous town imploded. Everybody will retire at the same time because there's no housing space for them to have been having children, and then our population will collapse and we'll be stuck unable to produce anything because everybody's retired, and unable to get any more immigrants to replace them because all of the retirees are filling up the houses. A classic demographic collapse would occur, and then the Britons would show up and probably defeat us once everything had started to collapse and we lost most of our employees. So this town is completely doomed, but for now it looks okay and we can pretend things are fine. Some classic civilization lessons from Caesar 3. Eventually, something always gets you in the end, be it fire, disease, spontaneous combustion, which is a combination of both it seems, or a Britain invasion. When the English show up you're in trouble, or indeed you'll just get old and die. The ravages of time can never be defeated, and Caesar 3 teaches us many important life lessons like this along the way, I suppose. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe this isn't a complete simulation of real life, but it seems like it is to me, or at least I would prefer real life if it was more like Caesar 3. Even though its mechanics are completely out of control, it's seemingly impossible to play. It's so opaque and refuses to tell you what's going on, even at the most minute level, so there's no micro to be had. But to some extent, as I've mentioned several times, that's kind of what I like about it. I like having no idea how much I have to produce. I like having no idea what the ranges of buildings are, and I like that you just can't even find this information out. It's not like it's obscure, or you could find it, but it's just not quite there when you need it, like in something like Anno 1800. Here, you don't know what's going on in your town. Your town's just doing its own thing, and you're vaguely gesturing at it, trying to make it work, and just seeing what sets on fire to give you some information on when it doesn't work. And that's a much more realistic simulation of how real-life management of populations of society goes than something like Anno 1800, where you can actually work out the correct thing to do. In real life, nobody's gathering this data. We don't know what the range of real-life buildings is. They're just doing something. You wait to see who dies and try to work out whether things were fine in retrospect. And that's the gameplay style of Caesar 3. So to some extent, this is the best city builder that there ever was or ever could be, because it's broken, precisely because it's broken. One thing I didn't really cover so far, because it doesn't really matter, is that you can click on people and they'll tell you what the biggest problem in your town is. And it's just interesting to do because each type of person has a different way of telling you that, so there's tons of little voiceover lines. In this case, unemployment is the so-called problem with my town, but as I mentioned, this unemployment is strategic. We need it because we need a bunch of people to drag into the labor force soon. Although that said, I suppose the unemployed people are aging too, so this plan almost certainly won't work. We're definitely doomed, there's no two ways about it. But for now, people are walking the streets bemoaning the amount of unemployment for whatever reason. Guys, did you know that we're actually a utopian commodity-free society where everybody gets everything for free? It doesn't matter if you have a job or not. Sometimes the governor just says, well, you don't have to have a job, and you still get all of the stuff. I suppose it's unfair to some extent, but everyone's living standards are so similar that it feels very egalitarian, even if some people have to work and some don't. Maybe they don't work very hard or something to make up for it. They could even swap places and do each other's jobs now and again to really spread the labor out or something. Well, we're basically there. We've got post-scarcity communism here in Caesar 3, although we've got about 20 years before everybody dies, so the people in this town better enjoy it. I suppose I'll leave now. Caesar 3, the best game ever. No point ever trying to play anything else after this game because it's only going to be worse, but I am going to try. The next thing I'm going to play is Homeworld, another old-fashioned game, one that's actually been remastered in the modern age. And, well, I'm just going to check it out because some people told me to, and from what I've seen so far, it's pretty good. Probably not as good, though, as Caesar 3.